When single father Jack Reynolds stood up to a restaurant owner who refused entry to a woman in a wheelchair, he thought he was just teaching his daughter about courage. What he didn't know was that the woman he defended, Claire Donovan, was hiding a fortune worth millions, or that his act of defiance, captured on dozens of cell phones, would spark a lawsuit that threatened to destroy his life. This is the story of how one moment of decency ignited a battle that would expose corruption, rewrite city laws, and prove that love can emerge from the most unexpected confrontations. Stay with me until the end of this story, and comment below with your city so I can see how far this message of courage has traveled across the world. The autumn wind carried the scent of rain and roasted coffee through downtown Portland's cobblestone streets as Jack Reynolds parallel parked his aging Honda Civic in front of Russo's, the kind of restaurant that announced its pretensions with gold leaf lettering and a doorman in an actual tailcoat. He cut the engine and turned to the back seat, where his 8-year-old daughter Mia was practically vibrating with excitement, her report card clutched in both hands like a winning lottery ticket. "Daddy, can I order the fancy pasta? The one with the name I can't say?" Jack laughed, the sound rougher than he intended. 3 years of single parenthood had worn his voice down to gravel, but Mia's joy always smoothed the edges. "Sweetheart, tonight you can order anything on that menu. Straight A's deserve straight-up celebration." She squealed, unbuckling her seatbelt with the kind of enthusiasm that made Jack's chest ache. Every moment like this, every proud smile, every achievement, every ordinary Tuesday that felt extraordinary, carried the ghost of what should have been. Sarah should have been here. His wife should have seen their daughter bloom into this bright, curious creature who devoured books and asked questions that made teachers call him in for conferences just to praise her. But Sarah's cancer had other plans, and now it was just the two of them against the world. Jack climbed out, straightened his only decent shirt, the blue button-down he reserved for parent-teacher conferences and rare celebrations, and walked around to open Mia's door. She bounded out, her purple backpack bouncing, her pigtails slightly crooked because he still hadn't mastered the art of hairstyling that his wife had made look effortless. "Remember our restaurant rules?" he asked, taking her hand as they approached the entrance. "Inside voices, napkin in lap, say please and thank you, and no phones at the table," Mia recited dutifully. Then she grinned up at him. "You remembered to charge yours, right? Last time you forgot and couldn't take my picture." "Charged and ready. I'm documenting this night for the history books." He ruffled her hair, earning a giggle and a half-hearted protest about messing up her style. The doorman, a stern-faced man whose name tag read Peter, held the door open with mechanical courtesy. The interior of Russo's hit Jack like a wave of intimidation. Crystal chandeliers that probably cost more than his car, tables draped in white linen so pristine they looked afraid of food, and the kind of hushed atmosphere that made even breathing feel inappropriate. Classical music whispered from hidden speakers, and well-dressed couples murmured over wine glasses that caught the light like liquid rubies. Jack's delivery driver's salary suddenly felt very loud in this quiet space. "Reservation?" A hostess materialized at a wooden podium, her expression managing to be both welcoming and somehow measuring his net worth in a single glance. "Reynolds, 7:30, Jack said, trying to sound like he belonged here. She scanned her tablet, her perfectly manicured nail clicking against the screen. "Ah, yes, table for two. If you'll follow me, The crash of the front door interrupted her, slamming open with enough force to rattle the chandelier. Every head in the restaurant turned as a woman in a wheelchair maneuvered through the entrance, slightly breathless, clearly flustered. She was maybe in her early 30s, with auburn hair pulled back in a professional bun, wearing a charcoal blazer that spoke of boardrooms and business lunches. Her wheelchair was sleek, expensive-looking, the kind of medical equipment that suggested both necessity and means. "Good evening," she said to the hostess, her voice cultured and warm. "Table for one, please? I know I should have called ahead, but I'm sorry." The voice came from behind the woman, cold and sharp as January ice. Jack watched as a man emerged from what looked like a private dining area, mid-50s, salt and pepper hair, slicked back with too much product, wearing a suit that probably cost more than Jack's monthly rent. His face had the kind of entitled hardness that came from never hearing the word no, and his eyes were already dismissing the woman before she could finish turning her wheelchair around. "Vincent Russo," the hostess said quickly, her tone shifting to something between deference and nervousness. "Mr. Russo, this guest—" "I can see what she is," Vincent interrupted, and the way he said "she" made Jack's stomach clench. The restaurant owner gestured vaguely at the wheelchair, his lip curling slightly. "And I'm afraid we can't accommodate that situation tonight." The woman, Claire, Jack would later learn, went very still. "Excuse me?" "You heard me. The wheelchair. It's a safety hazard. Fire codes, you understand." Vincent's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Besides, it makes the other guests uncomfortable. This is a fine dining establishment, not a—" "Not a what?" Claire's voice had dropped 20 degrees. "Not a place where disabled people are allowed to exist?" The classical music suddenly seemed very loud in the silence that followed. Jack felt Mia's hand tighten in his, felt her looking up at him with those wide brown eyes that were far too knowing for 8 years old. Around them, other diners had stopped pretending not to listen. Phones were emerging from pockets and purses, a modern reflex to document conflict. Vincent's face flushed, but his expression remained granite hard. "I don't appreciate your tone, miss. I'm simply explaining that we're fully booked and cannot safely accommodate your equipment. Perhaps the diner 2 blocks down would be more suitable for your needs." "You're fully booked?" Claire repeated, her voice shaking now, not with fear, Jack realized, but with barely controlled rage. "Your hostess was about to seat me before you intervened." The hostess was mistaken. Vincent turned to the young woman at the podium, who had gone pale. "Weren't you Jennifer?" Jennifer looked like she wanted to melt into the floor. I didn't realize." "That's enough." Jack heard the words leave his mouth before his brain caught up with his body. He felt Mia's hand slip from his as he stepped forward, felt the weight of every eye in the restaurant turned toward him, felt his heart hammering against his ribs like it was trying to escape. Vincent's cold gaze found him. "I'm sorry, who are you?" "Someone who's about to lose his appetite," Jack said, and he was surprised by how steady his voice sounded despite the adrenaline flooding his system. "Sir, you just told this woman she can't eat here because she uses a wheelchair. That's not a safety concern. That's discrimination. That's illegal." "It's also none of your business," Vincent shot back, his voice rising. "This is my restaurant, and I decide who I serve. If you don't like it, there's the door." "Daddy?" Mia's voice was small, worried. Jack held up a hand, not taking his eyes off Vincent. "Hold on, sweetheart." To the owner. "Actually, it became my business the second you decided to humiliate someone in front of a room full of witnesses. You think people don't know what you're doing? You think we can't see through the fire code excuse?" "I don't have to explain my policies to a delivery driver," Vincent sneered, and Jack realized the man must have noticed the company logo still visible on his car keys. "Why don't you escort your daughter out of here before I have Peter remove both of you?" The doorman shifted uncomfortably, clearly not thrilled about the possibility of becoming involved. Claire rolled her wheelchair forward slightly. "Please, it's fine. I don't want to cause trouble." "You're not causing anything," Jack interrupted gently, glancing at her. "He is." Back to Vincent. "You know what? You're right. I am just a delivery driver. I work 12-hour shifts 6 days a week to put food on the table and keep my daughter in a decent school district. I can't afford lawyers or fancy restaurants or whatever power trip you're on right now. But I can afford to look my kid in the eye tonight and know I taught her something important." He felt Mia beside him now, her hand finding his again, small and warm and trusting. "What are you teaching her?" Vincent asked mockingly. "To stick her nose where it doesn't belong? To stand up for people who are being treated like garbage by bullies?" Jack's voice carried across the silent restaurant now, steady and clear. "To recognize cruelty when she sees it and refuse to look away. To understand that staying quiet, when someone's being discriminated against, makes you part of the problem." A woman at a nearby table raised her phone higher, clearly recording. Another diner muttered something approving. The atmosphere in the restaurant had shifted, molecules rearranging themselves around this confrontation. Vincent's face had gone from flushed to crimson. "You self-righteous son of a—" He caught himself, glancing at Mia. "You think you're a hero? You think this little performance matters? I'll have you know, I've donated hundreds of thousands to charities. I employ 30 people. I've been featured in Portland Magazine, and none of that matters if you treat human beings like inconveniences, Jack interrupted quietly. Money doesn't buy you the right to dehumanize people. Get out. Vincent's voice was quiet now, deadly. Get out of my restaurant right now, or I'll call the police and have you arrested for trespassing and harassment. We were invited in, Jack pointed out. We have a reservation. Not anymore, you don't. Your reservation is canceled. You're banned, permanently. Vincent turned to Claire. As for you, I'm going to have to ask you to leave as well. You're causing a disturbance. Claire's laugh was bitter, sharp as broken glass. I'm causing a disturbance? I haven't said anything except to respond to your bigotry. Now you're accusing me of being a bigot? Vincent's voice rose again. In my own establishment? That's slander. I could sue you for that. Then sue me, Jack said flatly. I'll say it too. You're a bigot. You're discriminating against someone because of their disability, and you're hiding behind fake concerns about safety and comfort to justify it. That's textbook bigotry. The phone cameras were multiplying now, a small constellation of recording devices capturing every word, every expression, every moment of this confrontation. Later, Jack would wonder if he'd known on some level that this moment was being preserved, digitized, prepared for the viral wildfire it would become. But in that instant, he was just a father trying to live up to the values he'd promised his late wife he'd teach their daughter. Daddy's right. Mia's voice was small but determined. Miss Sarah, she stumbled over the name, still uncomfortable using her late mother's first name. She told me before she got sick that people in wheelchairs are just people who sit down more. She said they're not scary or uncomfortable. She said they're brave. The restaurant went silent again. Jack felt his throat close up, unexpected tears burning behind his eyes. Sarah had said that, during one of her last good days, when she'd been preparing Mia for a world without her in it, she'd made lists of lessons, recorded videos, written letters for future birthdays. One of those lessons had been about compassion, about seeing past surfaces to the humanity beneath. Vincent's expression flickered, something uncomfortable crossing his face before hardening again. That's very sweet, little girl, but you don't understand adult business. Sometimes restaurants have to make difficult decisions about who deserves to be treated like a human being? Claire's voice cut across his, and Jack saw tears tracking down her cheeks now, though her expression remained fierce. What difficult decision is there to make? Either I'm a customer worthy of your service, or I'm not. Which is it? You're neither, Vincent said coldly. You're a liability. Your wheelchair could block emergency exits, could damage my floors, could upset your pretentious image, Jack finished for him. Could remind your wealthy customers that disability exists. Could challenge their comfortable illusion that everyone who matters is able-bodied and therefore like them. That's enough, Vincent roared, and suddenly Peter the doorman was there, along with a thick-necked man who was clearly security. I want all three of you out, now, before I have you forcibly removed. Jack looked down at Mia, saw his daughter's face set in determined lines, saw Sarah's stubbornness in the angle of her jaw. Sweetheart, I need you to go wait in the car for a moment, okay? But Daddy, please Mia, I promise I'll be right there. He squeezed her hand, then released it. Can you do that for me? She hesitated, then nodded, taking the car keys he offered. As she walked toward the door, she paused next to Claire's wheelchair. I think you're brave, she said quietly. And I think your wheelchair is actually kind of cool. It's like a fancy computer chair. Claire's expression crumbled and reformed, cycling through grief and gratitude in seconds. Thank you, sweetheart. That's the nicest thing anyone said to me in a long time. Mia nodded seriously, then continued out the door, disappearing into the autumn evening. Jack turned back to Vincent, acutely aware that he was now alone in his confrontation, that the doorman and security guard were moving closer, that this could turn physical very quickly. His heart was racing, his palms sweating, but he couldn't seem to make his feet move toward the exit. Last chance, Vincent said quietly. Leave quietly or leave in handcuffs. Your choice. I'll go, Jack said. But first, I want everyone in this restaurant to know something. He raised his voice slightly, making sure the words carried to every table, every recording phone, every witness. This man just violated the Americans with Disabilities Act. What he did tonight is illegal, it's immoral, and it's exactly the kind of casual cruelty that makes the world a harder place for people who are already fighting battles most of us can't imagine. If you saw what happened here and you stay silent, you're complicit. If you keep eating at this restaurant knowing what kind of man runs it, you're endorsing his bigotry. You're going to regret this, Vincent hissed. I have lawyers. I have connections. I will make sure you regret the day you decided to play hero in my restaurant. Jack met his eyes steadily. I already regret something, Mr. Russo. I regret that I almost brought my daughter to give you our money, that I almost supported a business run by someone who treats people like they're less than human just because they use a wheelchair. He turned to Claire. Ma'am, I'm sorry this happened to you. You deserve better than this. Claire wiped at her tears, managing a shaky smile. Thank you. I don't even know your name. Jack Reynolds, the delivery driver who's apparently now banned from Portland's fanciest restaurant. He offered a rueful grin. Not sure how I'll survive the loss. Claire Donovan. She extended her hand and Jack shook it, surprised by the strength of her grip. The woman who's apparently causing disturbances just by existing. Both of you, out, Vincent snapped. Peter, escort them. The doorman stepped forward apologetically. Sir, ma'am, if you would. We're going, Jack said, holding up his hands. He looked at Claire. Do you have a car? Can I help you get somewhere safe? I can manage, she said, but her voice shook slightly. Thank you, though. They moved toward the exit together, Jack walking slowly to match the pace of Claire's wheelchair, the security guard hovering uncomfortably behind them like he expected them to bolt back inside and start overturning tables. As they reached the door, Jack heard Vincent's voice carrying across the restaurant, loud and performative. Ladies and gentlemen, I apologize for the disturbance. Your meals tonight are on the house as compensation for that unpleasantness. Russo's has always been, and will always be, a place where discerning diners can expect the finest. The door closed behind them, cutting off Vincent's speech. The October air hit Jack like a cold splash of reality. What had he just done? He'd just gotten himself and his daughter kicked out of a restaurant, probably made an enemy of one of Portland's more influential business owners, and definitely blown their celebration dinner. Mia was going to be devastated. He found his daughter sitting on the hood of the Honda, swinging her legs, watching as Claire maneuvered her wheelchair down the shallow ramp that led from Russo's entrance to the sidewalk. The building's facade lights cast long shadows, and somewhere nearby a street musician was playing guitar, the melancholy melody seeming to underscore the surreal nature of what had just happened. That was scary, Mia announced as Jack approached, but also kind of cool, like when superheroes stand up to bad guys. I'm not a superhero, sweetheart. I'm just a dad who couldn't keep his mouth shut. Jack ran a hand through his hair, feeling the adrenaline starting to drain away, leaving exhaustion in its wake. I'm sorry about dinner. I know you were excited. Are you kidding? Mia bounced off the hood, her report card still clutched in one hand. That was way better than fancy pasta. You were like Captain America, but with arguing instead of a shield. Despite everything, Jack laughed. I don't think Captain America ever got kicked out of a restaurant. He would have if the restaurant was being mean to people. Mia's certainty was absolute. Then her expression shifted, growing more serious. Daddy, why was that man so mad at the lady in the wheelchair? Before Jack could formulate an age-appropriate explanation of discrimination, Claire's voice interrupted softly. Because some people are afraid of anything different, she said, having navigated her wheelchair closer to them. And sometimes fear makes people cruel. She'd stopped a few feet away under a streetlight that made the tears still drying on her cheeks glisten. Up close, Jack could see she was younger than he'd first thought, probably close to his own age, mid-30s at most. Her eyes were red-rimmed but sharp, intelligent, assessing him with an intensity that made him feel suddenly self-conscious about his rumpled shirt and cheap watch. I'm sorry you had to see that, sweetheart, Claire continued, addressing Mia directly. That must have been confusing. It was mean, Mia said matter-of-factly. Ms. Sarah said mean people are usually sad inside, and that's why they're mean to others. Is that man sad? Claire considered this with unexpected seriousness. You know what? Your Miss Sarah sounds like she was a very wise person. She was my mom, Mia said quietly. She died when I was 6. But but she taught me lots of stuff before she went away. Jack saw something shift in Claire's expression. A flash of understanding, of recognition, of shared grief. I'm sure she's very proud of you, and of your father. An awkward silence descended, broken only by the distant guitar and the sound of traffic on the street behind them. Jack shifted uncomfortably, suddenly aware that they were just standing on a sidewalk in downtown Portland, three people connected by a moment of conflict and nothing else. "Well," he said finally, "I should get Mia home. It's a school night, and we've had enough excitement for one evening." "Wait," Claire's voice stopped him as he was guiding Mia toward the car. "Please, I know this is strange, but would you consider having dinner with me? Both of you? There's a little Italian place 2 blocks from here, family-owned, nothing fancy. I'd like to buy you dinner as a thank you for what you did back there." Jack hesitated. "You don't have to thank us. We didn't really do anything except make a scene. You stood up for me when you had no reason to, when it would have been easier and safer to look away." Claire's voice was firm. "That means something, please. Let me buy you dinner, unless you have somewhere else to be." Jack thought about the frozen pizza waiting in his freezer, the pile of laundry he'd been meaning to fold for 3 days, the empty evening stretching ahead with nothing but homework and bedtime routines to fill it. He glanced at Mia, saw the hope sparking in her eyes, saw Sarah's voice echoing in his memory. "Life is short, Jack. Say yes to kindness. Say yes to connection. Say yes to moments that might become memories." "Okay," he heard himself say, "but only if you promise to let me pay for dessert." Claire's smile was like sunrise. "Deal." Almost. The restaurant, Marchetti's, was exactly the kind of place Jack usually felt comfortable. Warm lighting, mismatched chairs, the smell of garlic and tomato sauce thick enough to taste, and the sound of family arguments drifting from the kitchen. The owner, a round woman in her 60s with flour on her apron, greeted Claire like an old friend. "Claire, Bella, so good to see you." She kissed both of Claire's cheeks, then turned to Jack and Mia with the same enthusiasm. "Any friend of Claire's is family here. Come, I have the perfect table." She led them to a corner booth, helped Claire maneuver her wheelchair into position at the table's end, and immediately began recommending dishes with the kind of passionate authority that brooked no argument. Within minutes, they had drinks, wine for the adults, apple juice for Mia, and a basket of bread that was still warm from the oven. "I love this place," Mia announced, already reaching for the butter. "It smells like happiness." Claire laughed, a sound that seemed to surprise her with its ease. "That's the best description of Marchetti's I've ever heard. Maria, did you hear that? The place smells like happiness." The owner, who had been hovering nearby, beamed. "That's the secret ingredient, Piccola. Happiness and lots of garlic." She winked and disappeared back toward the kitchen. For a few minutes, they busied themselves with bread and small talk, the kind of careful, getting-to-know-you conversation that people have when they've been thrown together by unusual circumstances. Mia did most of the talking, her 8-year-old enthusiasm filling any potential awkward silences with observations about school, her favorite books, and her recent discovery that she could do a cartwheel if she tried really, really hard. Jack found himself relaxing in increments, the tension of the confrontation at Russo's slowly draining away as he watched his daughter charm this stranger with her guileless honesty. Claire, for her part, seemed equally at ease, asking Mia questions about her interest, sharing stories from her own childhood that had Mia giggling into her juice. "So," Claire said eventually, after their food had arrived, steaming plates of pasta that lived up to the room's delicious smell, "what do you do, Jack? Besides rescue damsels in distress from discriminatory restaurant owners, that's actually my side hustle. My main job is delivering packages for Parcel Quick." He shrugged, twirling linguine around his fork. "Not glamorous, but it pays the bills, mostly." "He's really good at it," Mia chimed in. "He knows every street in Portland, like a human GPS." "High praise," Claire said, smiling. "And you're raising this amazing human all by yourself? That's impressive." Jack felt his chest tighten. Sarah was the impressive one. "I'm just trying not to mess up what she started." "I think you're selling yourself short." Claire's voice was gentle. "What you did tonight, standing up to Vincent Russo like that, most people wouldn't have done that. Most people would have looked away." "I couldn't." Jack met her eyes across the table. Not with Mia watching. How do I teach her to be brave if I'm not willing to be brave for her? Something in Claire's expression shifted, growing distant. My father used to say something similar. He said courage isn't the absence of fear, it's the decision that something else matters more than the fear. He sounds wise. He was. Past tense. Claire took a sip of her wine. He died 5 years ago, car accident. The same one that put me in this chair. The statement landed in the middle of the table like a stone in still water, ripples of understanding spreading outward. Jack felt Mia go quiet beside him, felt the weight of shared loss creating an unexpected bridge between their small table and the rest of the universe. "I'm sorry," Jack said quietly. I'm so sorry. Thank you." Claire's smile was sad but genuine. He was a good man. He would have liked you, I think. He always appreciated people who stood up for what was right, consequences be damned. "What did he do?" Mia asked softly. "He was a businessman, started his own company from nothing, built it into something successful." Claire's voice carried obvious pride. "He taught me everything I know about running an organization, about leadership, about integrity." "Is that what you do?" Jack asked. "Business?" "Something like that." Claire's answer was vague enough to be noticeable, but before Jack could press, she changed the subject. "What about you, Mia? What do you want to be when you grow up?" The conversation shifted, flowing into easier topics. Mia's ambitions, currently fluctuating between veterinarian and astronaut. Claire's love of reading, matching Mia's enthusiasm book for book. Jack's attempts to master cooking beyond his limited repertoire of 5 dishes, currently stuck at 4.5. They laughed, they talked, they connected in that strange, unexpected way that sometimes happens when crisis strips away the usual social pretenses and leaves people raw enough to be real with each other. It was nearly 9:30 when Jack finally checked his watch and realized how late it had gotten. "We should go. Mia has school tomorrow, and I have an early delivery route." They settled the bill, Jack true to his promise about dessert, and made their way outside. The October night had grown colder, frost threatening in the sharp air. Claire wrapped her coat tighter, and Jack noticed the way she seemed to brace herself before speaking. "Thank you," she said, "for tonight, for what you did at Russo's, for dinner, for conversation, for treating me like a person instead of a problem. You have no idea how rare that is." "You are a person," Jack said simply. "Anyone who can't see that is an idiot." "There are a lot of idiots in the world." "True. But there are also a lot of good people, like Maria." He gestured back toward Marchetti's. "And hopefully, like most of the people who saw what happened tonight." Claire's expression clouded. "About that. Those phones. All those people recording. I've been thinking, that video is probably online already. It might go viral." Jack hadn't considered that. The adrenaline of the confrontation had pushed everything else out of his mind. "Would that be bad?" "I don't know." Claire looked uncertain for the first time that evening. "Viral videos can go either way. Either people support what you did or they tear you apart for making a scene, sometimes both." "Then I guess we'll find out." Jack tried to sound more confident than he felt. "Whatever happens, I don't regret it." "You might. Vincent Russo doesn't strike me as the forgiving type." "Let him be mad. What's he going to do? Ban me from more restaurants I can't afford?" Claire laughed, but it sounded worried. "Just be careful, okay? Men like Vincent have long memories and expensive lawyers." They exchanged phone numbers, just in case, Claire said, though in case of what went unspoken. Then they parted ways, Claire heading toward a nearby parking garage, Jack and Mia walking back to the Honda. "I like her," Mia announced as Jack buckled her into the back seat. "She's nice and funny and smart." "She is all of those things," Jack agreed. "Do you think we'll see her again?" Jack thought about Claire's warning about Vincent Russo, about viral videos and expensive lawyers, about the way the universe had a habit of making simple moments complicated. "I don't know, sweetheart. Maybe. I hope so." Mia yawned, her excitement finally giving way to exhaustion. "Tonight was the best celebration ever, Daddy. Even better than fancy pasta would have been." Jack started the car, glancing back at his daughter in the rear-view mirror. She was already half asleep, her report card still clutched in one hand, a small smile on her face. "Yeah," he said softly, pulling out into the empty street. "Yeah, it really was." But by morning, Jack's phone had 17 missed calls, 43 text messages, and 6 voicemails. He woke to the sound of notifications chiming like a broken alarm clock, sat up in confusion, and fumbled for his phone on the nightstand. The first text was from his coworker, Derek. Dude, are you the guy from the restaurant video?" The second was from his sister in Seattle. "Jack, please call me. What the hell happened last night?" The third was from a number he didn't recognize. "Is this the father from Russo's? I'm a reporter with the Portland Tribune and would love to interview you." Jack's stomach dropped. He opened his phone's browser and typed Russo's Restaurant Portland Wheelchair, feeling his mouth go dry as the search results loaded. The first hit was from TMZ. "Watch. Single dad takes down bigoted restaurant owner in viral confrontation." The second was from a local news site. Portland restaurant owner denies service to disabled woman, gets called out by hero father. The third was from BuzzFeed. This dad's defense of a wheelchair user has everyone talking about disability discrimination. Each headline was accompanied by the same video, someone's phone footage from the restaurant, surprisingly clear, capturing the entire confrontation. Jack watched himself step forward, heard his own voice saying, "That's discrimination, that's illegal." Watched Vincent Russo's face contort with rage, heard Mia's small voice saying, "Ms. Sarah told me before she got sick that people in wheelchairs are just people who sit down more." The video had been viewed 3.2 million times. "Oh God," Jack whispered. "Daddy?" Mia's voice came from her bedroom doorway, sleepy and confused. "Why is your phone making so much noise?" Jack looked at his daughter, at her tousled hair and confused expression, and tried to figure out how to explain that their private moment of standing up for what was right had just become public property, dissected and discussed by millions of strangers across the internet. "Sweetheart," he said slowly, "remember how people were recording last night at the restaurant?" "Uh-huh." "Well, they put those videos online, and a lot of people have seen them. Like on YouTube? Like everywhere." Jack's phone buzzed again. Another unknown number, another text asking for an interview. "A lot of people are talking about what happened." Mia processed this with 8-year-old logic. "Are they mad at the mean restaurant man?" I think some of them are, yeah." "Good." She nodded decisively. "He was mean to Claire. He should apologize." Jack's phone rang, his boss at Parcel Quick. He answered with trepidation. "Jack! Jesus, man, are you okay?" Roberto's voice was urgent. "I've had 5 calls this morning from reporters asking about you, asking if you still work here, asking for statements. What the hell happened?" Jack explained, his voice flat with shock as the reality of the situation continued sinking in. 3 million views. Reporters. His face all over the internet. "Shit," Roberto said when Jack finished. Okay, look, I need you to take a few days off. Not because you did anything wrong. What you did was right, man. Anyone with eyes can see that, but because we've got media crawling all over us, and I need time to figure out how to handle this without it affecting the business." "I can't afford to take days off," Jack protested. "I have bills, I have rent." "Paid leave," Roberto interrupted. "Full pay, don't worry. Just lay low for a bit, okay? Let this blow over. And Jack, I'm proud of you, man. That took guts." The call ended. Jack sat on the edge of his bed, Mia hovering uncertainly nearby, and tried to understand how his life had transformed overnight from ordinary to extraordinary, from private to public, from simple to impossibly complicated. His phone rang again. This time, it was Claire. "Jack? Oh, thank God. I've been trying to reach you for an hour. Have you seen the videos?" Yeah, I've seen them." Jack laughed, the sound slightly hysterical. 3 million views and counting. It's more than that now. It's on every major news site. Twitter is exploding. There's a hashtag trending, #StandUpForClaire. Claire's voice shook. "Jack, I'm so sorry. I never meant for this to happen, for you to be exposed like this." "It's not your fault." Vincent's going to come after you. Men like him don't take public humiliation well. He's probably already talking to lawyers, planning his revenge. Then let him. Jack surprised himself with how calm he sounded. I meant what I said last night. I don't regret standing up for you. And if him coming after me means that people pay attention to what he did, to how he treated you, then maybe it's worth it. A long pause. Then, you're either very brave or very stupid. Can't it be both? Claire laughed, surprised. Yeah, I guess it can. They talked for a few more minutes, sharing information about the media attention, comparing notes on messages and calls. Before they hung up, Claire said something that made Jack's heart skip. Whatever happens next, Jack, whatever Vincent throws at us, we're in this together now, okay? You're not alone. Okay, Jack said quietly. Together. After the call ended, Jack made breakfast for Mia, chocolate chip pancakes because the morning felt like it needed something sweet, and tried to explain to his daughter that their lives had just gotten very, very complicated. She listened with wide eyes, asked questions that were simultaneously too simple and too profound, and then announced that she wanted to go to school and tell everyone her dad was famous. I'm not famous, Jack protested. I'm just a guy who got caught on video. A guy who stood up to a bully, Mia corrected. That's even better than famous. Jack dropped Mia off at school, enduring curious looks from other parents who had clearly seen the video, and returned home to find a news van parked outside his apartment building. He ducked inside before the reporter could intercept him, ignoring the shouted questions about whether he planned to sue Vincent Russo, whether he knew the wheelchair-bound woman, whether he had any comment on the public response. Inside his apartment, Jack made coffee and opened his laptop, trying to assess the full scope of what had happened. The video wasn't just viral, it was a cultural moment. Think pieces were being written about disability discrimination in fine dining. Activists were organizing protests outside Russo's. Vincent Russo's Instagram and Yelp pages were being flooded with one-star reviews and angry comments. But there was also a darker undercurrent. Some people were defending Vincent, claiming he had the right to refuse service, that Jack was a social justice warrior looking for attention, that the whole thing was staged. Anonymous accounts were posting Jack's address, his employer's information, his late wife's obituary with cruel commentary. The internet, Jack was learning, was both magnificent and monstrous in its capacity for collective response. His phone rang again. Another unknown number. This time Jack answered. Mr. Reynolds? My name is Margaret Stevens. I'm calling from the law offices of Preston, Hayes, and Burke. We represent Vincent Russo and the Russo's Restaurant Corporation. Jack's blood went cold. Okay. Mr. Russo wishes to inform you that you are hereby banned from all Russo restaurant properties in perpetuity. Additionally, we are serving you notice that Mr. Russo is considering legal action for defamation, slander, and tortious interference with business operations. You made several false and damaging statements about our client on a public platform, statements that have resulted in significant financial and reputational harm to his business. I didn't make any false statements, Jack said, trying to keep his voice steady. Everything I said was true. He did discriminate against a disabled woman. That's illegal. That's your interpretation. Our client disagrees, and he has the resources to make his disagreement very expensive for you. The lawyer's voice was clinical, professional. We're offering you one opportunity to avoid litigation, issue a public apology, admit you misunderstood the situation, and request that all viral videos be taken down. Do this within 48 hours, and Mr. Russo will consider the matter closed. And if I don't, then you'll be hearing from us in an official capacity. Mr. Russo is prepared to sue you for every penny you have and every penny you'll ever earn. Do you have a lawyer, Mr. Reynolds? No. Then I suggest you get one. You have 48 hours. The line went dead. Jack sat in his kitchen, coffee growing cold in his hand, and felt the walls of his simple life closing in. He had no savings to speak of, no safety net, no resources to fight a prolonged legal battle with a wealthy restaurant owner who clearly had no intention of letting this go. He thought of Mia, of her bright future, of the college fund he'd been slowly building, and how quickly it would evaporate if he had to hire lawyers and fight court battles. Maybe he should apologize. Maybe it wasn't worth it. Maybe protecting his daughter's future mattered more than defending his pride or some abstract principle about standing up for what was right. His phone rang again. This time it was Claire. "Jack, I just got a call from someone claiming to be Vincent's lawyer. Did you?" "Yeah. 48 hours to apologize or he sues me for everything I have." Jack laughed bitterly. "Which, granted, isn't much, but it's all I've got." "Damn it! Damn him!" Claire sounded furious. "He's trying to silence you, to make an example of you so no one else dares to call him out." "It's working," Jack admitted quietly. "Claire, I have a kid to think about. I can't afford lawyers. I can't afford to lose my job or my apartment. Maybe I should just apologize and make this go away." "Don't." The word was sharp, urgent. "Jack, don't let him bully you into backing down. What he did was wrong. What you did was right. If you apologize now, you're telling every bigot with money and power that they can do whatever they want as long as they threaten hard enough. Easy for you to say, you're not the one facing a lawsuit." A long pause. Then, "What if I told you I could help? That I know people, have resources, can connect you with lawyers who specialize in exactly this kind of case?" "I can't afford—" "You're not listening. I'm not asking you to pay. I'm offering to help, to stand beside you the way you stood beside me last night." Jack's throat tightened. "Why? You don't know me. We met yesterday. Why would you put yourself in Vincent's crosshairs for a stranger?" "Because you're not a stranger anymore. Because what you did mattered. Because I'm tired of people like Vincent using money and power to escape accountability." Claire's voice softened. "And because I think maybe we're not as alone as we both thought we were." Jack closed his eyes, thought of Mia's face when she'd said her father was like Captain America, thought of Sarah's voice telling him to say yes to moments that might become memories, thought of the alternative, apologizing to Vincent, teaching his daughter that bullies win if they're rich enough. "Okay," he said finally. "Okay, I won't apologize, and I'll accept your help. But Claire, if this goes bad, if Vincent comes after you too, then we'll face it together. That's what I'm trying to tell you, Jack. You're not in this alone anymore." After they hung up, Jack sat for a long moment in his quiet apartment, listening to the sound of traffic outside, the hum of his refrigerator, the ordinary sounds of ordinary life. Except his life wasn't ordinary anymore. In the space of one evening and one viral video, he'd become part of something bigger than himself. A public conversation about discrimination, about courage, about what it means to stand up. When standing up comes with a cost. His phone buzzed with another notification, another stranger thanking him for speaking up, another news outlet requesting an interview. Another voice in the growing chorus of people who had seen that video and decided it mattered. Jack thought about Vincent Russo's threat, about the lawsuit hanging over his head like a guillotine, about the 48 hours ticking away toward a reckoning he couldn't afford. Then he thought about Mia's smile when she'd called him a superhero, about Claire's hand in his, warm and real and grateful, about the possibility that maybe, just maybe, doing the right thing could lead somewhere other than ruin. He picked up his phone and typed a response to Derek's text. "Yeah, that's me. Long story. Buy you a beer and tell you about it?" Then he opened his laptop and began researching disability discrimination law, preparing himself for the fight he'd just committed to, ready or not. Outside, the October morning was cold and bright, frost melting under the climbing sun. Inside, Jack Reynolds, delivery driver, single father, accidental viral sensation, began the process of learning that sometimes the moments that change your life don't announce themselves with trumpets and fanfare. Sometimes they arrive disguised as an ordinary dinner celebration, a stranger in need, and a choice between silence and speech. Sometimes courage looks like standing up in a restaurant full of witnesses and deciding that principles matter more than peace. And sometimes, just sometimes, that moment of courage becomes the first step in a journey neither revenge nor reward can anticipate. Jack didn't know what would happen next, but as he read about ADA violations and precedent cases, as he prepared to face whatever Vincent Russo threw at him, he realized something important. He wasn't afraid anymore. Whatever came next, he would face it. Not alone, but alongside a woman who understood what it meant to be judged by appearance, alongside a daughter who believed her father was a hero, alongside strangers who had seen that video and decided that standing together mattered more than standing apart. The viral storm had only just begun. 3 days after the video exploded across the internet, Jack found himself sitting in a downtown coffee shop across from a woman who introduced herself as Patricia Huang, civil rights attorney, and apparently Claire's personal recommendation. Patricia was in her late 40s, with sharp eyes behind designer frames, and the kind of presence that suggested she'd won more courtroom battles than she'd lost. "Let me be clear about what we're dealing with," Patricia said, sliding a folder across the table. "Vincent Russo isn't bluffing. His legal team has already filed preliminary paperwork. They're claiming defamation, intentional interference with business relationships, and emotional distress. They're asking for $200,000 in damages." Jack felt the blood drain from his face. $200,000? I don't have $200 in savings right now. How can he possibly? He can't. Not realistically. Patricia's expression remained calm, professional. "These numbers are designed to terrify you into submission. Vincent's strategy is simple. Overwhelm you with the prospect of financial ruin until you recant everything you said and disappear quietly. It's legal intimidation, and it works on most people who don't have resources to fight back." "I don't have resources to fight back," Jack pointed out, his voice hollow. "That's where you're wrong." Patricia leaned forward. "Claire Donovan has retained my services on your behalf, pro bono. You're not paying a dime, which means Vincent just lost his primary tactical advantage." Jack blinked, processing this. "Claire did what? I can't let her pay for—" "She's not asking permission. She's offering solidarity." Patricia's smile was thin but genuine. "Besides, this case interests me professionally. The ADA violations are clear-cut. Vincent's discrimination was witnessed by dozens of people and captured on multiple videos. If he wants to take this to court, I'm more than happy to countersue him into the ground for disability discrimination." "But the lawsuit, his lawyers said I slandered him, that I made false statements. Truth is an absolute defense against defamation." Patricia tapped the folder. "Everything you said in that restaurant was factually accurate. Vincent did refuse service to a disabled woman. He did violate the Americans with Disabilities Act. You called him a bigot, which is an opinion protected by the First Amendment. His lawsuit is frivolous, and any competent judge will see that immediately." Jack felt something loosen in his chest, though anxiety still coiled tight around his ribs. "So what happens now?" "Now we go on offense. We file a countersuit against Vincent and Russo's for blatant ADA violations. We subpoena his business records, his employee testimonies, his previous complaints. We turn his intimidation tactic into a public examination of his discriminatory practices." Patricia's eyes glinted behind her glasses. "And based on what Claire has told me about Vincent's reputation, I'm willing to bet we'll find a pattern of behavior that goes far beyond one incident." "A pattern?" "People like Vincent rarely start being bigots overnight. If he was comfortable enough to discriminate so openly, so publicly, it's because he's done it before and gotten away with it." Patricia pulled out her tablet, showing Jack a series of documents. "I've already started preliminary research. In the past 5 years, Russo's has been cited twice for accessibility violations. Once for inadequate wheelchair ramps, once for blocking an emergency exit with decorative furniture. Both times, Vincent paid the fine and ignored the compliance order. The city never followed up." Jack scanned the documents, feeling anger replace anxiety. "He's been doing this for years?" "Longer, probably. These are just the official complaints. I'm guessing there are dozens of incidents that were never reported. People who didn't want to make a scene, who didn't know their rights, who assumed nothing would change, even if they spoke up." Patricia closed her tablet. "That's why your video matters, Jack. You didn't just document one instance of discrimination. You created evidence that can't be ignored, can't be buried, can't be paid off quietly." The coffee shop around them hummed with afternoon activity. Students hunched over laptops, couples sharing pastries, the espresso machine hissing and gurgling. Normal life continuing while Jack's world tilted sideways into something that felt increasingly surreal. "What about Claire?" Jack asked quietly. "If we countersue, if we go after Vincent publicly, won't that expose her too? Put her in the spotlight?" Patricia's expression softened slightly. That's her decision to make, and she's already made it. Claire wants to be a plaintiff in the countersuit. She wants her name on the record as someone who was discriminated against. But the media attention, the scrutiny, she's aware, and she's willing. Patricia paused, choosing her words carefully. Jack, I don't know how much Claire has told you about herself, but she's not someone who scares easily. She's dealt with worse than Vincent Russo. Jack thought about the woman he'd met 3 nights ago, poised, intelligent, clearly accustomed to being underestimated. There was something Patricia wasn't saying, some context he was missing, but before he could press the issue, his phone buzzed with an incoming call. It was the school. I have to take this, Jack said apologetically, answering. Hello? Mr. Reynolds, this is Principal Morrison. I'm calling because we've had an incident involving Mia. Jack's heart stopped. Is she hurt? What happened? She's fine physically, but there was an altercation with another student during lunch. The other child's parent has filed a complaint, and I need you to come to the school immediately to discuss the situation. 20 minutes later, Jack was sitting in Principal Morrison's office with his daughter beside him, trying to understand how his 8-year-old had ended up in the middle of a schoolyard fight. Mia punched Tyler Henderson in the nose, Principal Morrison explained, her expression caught between disapproval and something that looked suspiciously like suppressed amusement. Tyler required the nurse's attention, though thankfully nothing was broken. Mia doesn't punch people, Jack said automatically. Then he looked at his daughter, arms crossed, jaw set in stubborn lines, a purple bruise forming on her knuckles. Mia, what happened? Tyler said mean things about you, Mia said flatly. He said his dad said you were a troublemaker and that we're probably poor, and that's why you were trying to get money from that restaurant man by pretending to be nice. Jack felt his stomach drop. Sweetheart. And then he said that the lady in the wheelchair was probably faking it for attention, and that people who can't walk are useless anyway, and his dad says people like her should just stay home where normal people don't have to look at them. Mia's voice shook, tears threatening. So I punched him, because Ms. Sarah said we're supposed to stand up to bullies, and Tyler was being a bully. Principal Morrison sighed. Mr. Reynolds, I understand the circumstances are unusual given the recent publicity surrounding your family, and I'm sympathetic to the fact that your daughter was defending you. However, violence is never acceptable, regardless of provocation. Mia will need to serve detention for the rest of the week, and I strongly suggest you have a conversation with her about appropriate conflict resolution. I will, absolutely. Jack put his hand on Mia's shoulder, feeling her trembling beneath his palm. But Principal Morrison, what about Tyler? What he said, those aren't ideas an 8-year-old comes up with on his own. He's repeating things he's heard at home. Shouldn't we be addressing that? I've contacted Tyler's parents as well. They're aware of the situation. And? What did they say? Principal Morrison's expression became carefully neutral. Mr. Henderson expressed his belief that children should be taught to speak honestly about societal problems, and that coddling weakness serves no one. The words hung in the air like toxic smoke. Jack felt rage building in his chest, hot and immediate. Weakness, he repeated slowly. Tyler's father thinks people with disabilities are weak? And he's teaching his son that discriminating against them is honesty? I'm not here to mediate parent disagreements, Mr. Reynolds. I'm here to maintain discipline in my school. Mia violated that discipline by resorting to physical violence. However, she held up a hand as Jack started to protest. I will be speaking with Mr. Henderson about the language his son is using and where those attitudes might be coming from. What Tyler said was inappropriate and hurtful, even if it didn't justify Mia's response. Jack looked at his daughter, saw Sarah's fierce determination in the set of her small shoulders, and felt something shift in his understanding of what the past 3 days had cost them. It wasn't just viral videos and lawsuits. It was playgrounds and classrooms, innocent spaces now contaminated with adult conflicts and prejudices. Come on, Mia, he said quietly. Let's go home. They walked to the car in silence. Jack opened the back door for his daughter, watched her climb in with none of her usual energy, and felt his heart breaking into smaller and smaller pieces. Am I in trouble? Mia asked in a small voice as Jack started the engine. You're in some trouble, Jack admitted. Hitting people isn't okay even when they say terrible things. There are better ways to handle bullies. Like what you did at the restaurant? Yeah, like using words instead of fists. Like standing up to cruelty without becoming cruel yourself. Jack met her eyes in the rearview mirror. But Mia, I'm also proud of you. Because you were defending someone who couldn't defend themselves. That took courage. Tyler's dad is wrong, right? About Claire? About people in wheelchairs? Tyler's dad is very, very wrong. And I'm sorry you had to hear those things. I'm sorry that standing up for what's right has made your life harder. Mia was quiet for a moment, processing. Then, would you do it again? If you could go back to that night at the restaurant, would you still stand up for Claire? Jack thought about the question seriously. He thought about the lawsuit, the media attention, the threats and harassment, his daughter getting into fights at school because of choices he'd made. He thought about all the ways his simple act of decency had complicated their lives, brought chaos into their careful routine, exposed them to scrutiny and judgment and consequences he was still discovering. Then he thought about Claire crying on the curb, about the way her hand had felt in his when they shook, strong and grateful and human. He thought about the thousands of messages he'd received from people thanking him for speaking up, from disabled individuals sharing their own stories of discrimination, from parents saying they'd shown their kids the video as a lesson in courage. Yeah, he said finally. Yeah, I would. Every time. Mia smiled, and some of the tension left her small frame. Good. Because Ms. Sarah would have done it too, and I want to be like both of you. That evening, after Mia was in bed, Jack called Claire. She answered on the first ring, her voice tight with stress. I heard about what happened at Mia's school. Jack, I'm so sorry. This is exactly what I was afraid of, that my problems would become your problems, that standing up for me would hurt you and your daughter. Stop, Jack interrupted gently. None of this is your fault. Vincent's the one threatening lawsuits. Tyler Henderson's father is the one teaching his son to hate disabled people. You're just the person who happened to be there when I decided to teach my daughter about courage. But if I hadn't been there, then some other injustice would have happened, and I'd like to think I still would have spoken up. Claire, you can't take responsibility for other people's bigotry. A long pause. Then, in a smaller voice, I met with Patricia today. She told me about the countersuit, about going public with everything. Jack, there's something I need to tell you. Something I should have told you that first night, but I was afraid it would change how you saw me. Jack's grip tightened on his phone. Okay. I'm not just some woman who uses a wheelchair. I'm not just an office worker or a random person who happened to cross Vincent's path. Claire took a shaky breath. My full name is Claire Donovan. I'm the CEO and primary shareholder of Donovan Industries. My father founded the company 30 years ago, and when he died, I inherited everything. The business, the money, all of it. Jack, I'm worth about $40 million. The number hit Jack like cold water. $40 million. The woman he'd defended, the woman he'd shared pasta with, the woman who'd become something like a friend over the past 3 days, she was a millionaire. Not just wealthy, but rich enough that Vincent Russo's $200,000 lawsuit was pocket change. Jack's voice came out strangled. You're a CEO? You run a company? A tech company. We develop accessibility software and adaptive devices for people with disabilities. It's work my father started after the accident, after he saw how poorly designed the world was for people like me. Claire's words came faster now, anxious to explain. I didn't tell you because I'm so tired of people treating me differently once they know. Either they see me as a charity case to pity, or they see me as a bank account to manipulate. I just wanted one night where someone saw me as Claire. Just Claire. Jack processed this, his mind reeling. The modest way she'd dressed, the self-deprecating humor, the way she'd offered to help with his legal fees without explaining exactly how much help she could afford to offer. It all made sense now. So when you said you could help with lawyers, Jack said slowly, you weren't talking about knowing people who might work pro bono. You were talking about paying for everything yourself. Yes, Patricia Huang is my personal attorney. I've used her services for years, both for business and personal matters. She's one of the best civil rights lawyers in the state, and she charges accordingly. Jack, I'm covering all legal fees, all court costs, everything. You don't have to worry about money. I can't let you do that. You can't stop me. Claire's voice was firm now, the executive confidence showing through. This isn't charity. This is me using my resources to fight something that's wrong. Vincent discriminated against me. You defended me, and now he's attacking you. We're both victims here, and I refuse to let him win just because he assumed we'd be too poor or too scared to fight back. Jack walked to his kitchen window, staring out at the parking lot of his apartment complex. A millionaire. Claire Donovan was a millionaire CEO who could buy his entire building without noticing the expense, and somehow she'd been sitting in his Honda Civic 3 nights ago, eating at a family restaurant, laughing at his daughter's jokes like they were all just ordinary people sharing an ordinary evening. Does this change things? Claire asked quietly, vulnerability creeping back into her voice. Between us? Now that you know? Did it? Jack examined his feelings with the same honesty he tried to bring to every difficult question. He thought about the woman he'd met that night, the warmth in her laugh, the intelligence in her eyes, the way she'd treated Mia with genuine interest rather than patronizing sweetness. He thought about their conversation at Marchetti's, the easy flow of words, the sense that he was talking to someone who understood loss and loneliness, and the strange courage it took to rebuild a life from ruins. The money didn't change any of that. The CEO title didn't erase the tears he'd seen on her face when Vincent refused her entry. The millions in her bank account didn't make her any less human, any less worthy of defense, any less deserving of being treated with basic decency. No, Jack said finally. It doesn't change things. You're still the person who thanked me for standing up for you. Still the person who made my daughter laugh. Still the person Vincent Russo treated like garbage for no reason except that she uses a wheelchair. He heard her breath catch, something between a laugh and a sob. You have no idea how much I needed to hear that. Claire, can I ask you something? Why hide it? If you're that successful, that established, why go out alone? Why dress down? Why act like you're just another person trying to get a table at a restaurant? Because I am just another person, Claire said softly. The chair doesn't define me, but neither does the money. And I'm exhausted by people who can't see past one or the other. My employees treat me like I'm fragile. My board members treat me like I'm a liability. Society treats me like I'm either inspirational or invisible, depending on whether my story is convenient for them. I just wanted one night where I could be normal, where I could eat dinner without a reservation at the best table, without staff hovering, without everyone performing their pity or admiration. And instead you got Vincent Russo. And instead I got you. Claire's voice warmed, which turned out to be much better than a quiet dinner alone. They talked for another hour, Claire explaining more about her company, her work, the complicated navigation of being a disabled woman in a business world that still largely saw disability as weakness. Jack shared more about his life with Mia, the challenges of single parenthood, the way grief sometimes hit him sideways on random Tuesdays when he heard a song Sarah used to love or smelled her perfume on a stranger passing by. When they finally hung up, Jack realized something that both thrilled and terrified him. He was starting to care about Claire Donovan in ways that had nothing to do with viral videos or lawsuits or shared battles against discrimination. He was starting to care about her as a woman, complex and brilliant and wounded and strong, who had somehow stumbled into his life at exactly the moment he'd forgotten he was allowed to want anything beyond survival. The next morning brought a new development that shifted everything sideways again. Jack's phone rang at 6 a.m. Patricia Huang, her voice crackling with controlled excitement. We've got something big. Jack, are you sitting down? I'm barely conscious. What's going on? I've been digging into Vincent Russo's history, and I found 5 other incidents, 5 documented cases of discrimination at Russo's over the past 7 years. Different victims, same pattern. A veteran in a wheelchair refused service in 2018. An elderly woman with a walker turned away in 2019. A man with a service dog told the animal wasn't allowed despite clear ADA protections. Each time, Vincent offered money to make it go away. Each time, the victims signed NDAs and disappeared. Jack was suddenly very awake. NDAs? He paid people to stay quiet about discriminating against them? Exactly. which means Vincent has known for years that what he's doing is illegal, has chosen to continue doing it anyway, and has actively worked to cover it up. This isn't ignorance or poor judgment. This is systematic, willful violation of civil rights law. Patricia's satisfaction was audible. And here's the best part. NDAs can be challenged in court when they're used to conceal illegal activity. I can petition to have those agreements voided, which would allow the previous victims to testify about their experiences. Will they? Testify, I mean? If they already signed agreements to stay quiet. That's the question. I've started reaching out very carefully. So far, I've made contact with 2 of them. One is hesitant, understandably afraid of Vincent's retaliation. But the other? Patricia paused dramatically. Former Marine named Marcus Webb. Lost his legs in Afghanistan, uses a wheelchair, and according to his initial phone call with me, he's been waiting 7 years for a chance to expose Vincent publicly. He signed the NDA because he needed the money for medical bills, but he's regretted it every day since. Jack felt something like hope unfurling in his chest. So we're not alone. There are other people Vincent hurt, other people who want to come forward. Not just people. A pattern. A documented, undeniable pattern of discrimination that turns Vincent's lawsuit from intimidation into evidence of his own guilt. He's suing you for calling him a bigot while simultaneously sitting on 7 years of settlements paid to disabled people he discriminated against. Any halfway competent prosecutor could build a civil rights case on this. What do we do now? Now we amend our countersuit. We add Marcus Webb as a co-plaintiff, if he's willing. We subpoena Vincent's financial records to uncover exactly how much he's paid over the years to silence victims. We file a complaint with the Department of Justice's Civil Rights Division, and we prepare for Vincent to fight back with everything he has, because we just turned his intimidation tactic into an existential threat to his entire business. After Patricia hung up, Jack sat in his small kitchen watching the sunrise through his window, trying to absorb how quickly everything was escalating. What had started as a single moment of standing up for a stranger was becoming something larger. A case study in discrimination. A public reckoning. A battle that would either validate his choice to speak up or destroy him for trying. His phone buzzed with a text from Claire. Patricia told me. This is it, Jack. This is how we win. Jack typed back. Or how we lose everything trying. Claire's response came immediately. Then we lose together. But I don't think we're going to lose. That afternoon, Jack met Marcus Webb at a coffee shop in Northeast Portland. The former Marine was maybe 50, with gray threading through his close-cropped hair and the kind of presence that suggested he'd seen harder things than restaurant discrimination and survived them all. His wheelchair was military-grade, functional rather than sleek, and his handshake nearly crushed Jack's fingers. Saw your video, Marcus said without preamble. Watched it maybe 20 times. First time I've seen someone stand up to that son of a bitch publicly. I didn't know about the others, Jack admitted. Didn't know he'd been doing this for years. Yeah, well, he's good at making it go away. Offers you money when you're desperate, makes you sign papers that say you'll never talk about what happened, threatens you with more lawsuits if you break the agreement. Marcus's expression hardened. I needed that money. $30,000 for what he called emotional distress and inconvenience. $30,000 to shut up about the fact that he told me my wheelchair made his customers uncomfortable, that having a crippled soldier at his restaurant reminded people of unpleasant things. Jesus, Jack breathed. That's what he called me. A crippled soldier. Said I should be grateful he was offering anything, that technically he could refuse service to anyone for any reason, that if I made a fuss I'd just look like another veteran playing the sympathy card. Marcus's hands clenched on his wheelchair's armrests. And I believed him. I was so tired, so broke, so sick of fighting that I took his blood money and signed his papers and hated myself for 7 years. You don't have to hate yourself for surviving, Jack said quietly. You did what you needed to do. Maybe, but when I saw your video, when I saw you stand up for that woman without even knowing her, without anything to gain from it, I realized I'd been telling myself survival was enough. That keeping quiet was acceptable because speaking up was too hard, too risky, too likely to fail. Marcus met Jack's eyes. You reminded me that some things are worth risking failure for. They talked for over an hour. Marcus shared his story, the accident in Afghanistan that took his legs, the brutal recovery, the slow realization that civilian life viewed his disability as a tragedy rather than simply a fact. He talked about the night at Russo's, the humiliation of being turned away while other diners pretended not to notice, the way Vincent's offer of money had felt simultaneously like salvation and damnation. "I'll testify," Marcus said finally. "Whatever Patricia needs, whatever helps build the case. I'm in. Vincent Russo has been getting away with this for too long, and it's time someone held him accountable." Jack felt something settle in his chest, determination mixing with fear, purpose cutting through anxiety. This was bigger than his viral video now. This was about every person Vincent had hurt, every disabled individual who'd been made to feel unwelcome or invisible or inconvenient. This was about changing something real. "Thank you," Jack said simply, "for trusting us, for being willing to speak up. Thank you for starting this, for giving us a chance to finish it." Marcus extended his hand again, and this time Jack shook it with equal firmness. Two men who'd been thrust into an unwanted battle now choosing to fight it together. The media coverage intensified over the following week. News outlets picked up the story about Marcus Webb and the possibility of more victims. Think pieces proliferated about NDAs being used to silence discrimination claims. Disability rights activists organized protests outside Russo's, holding signs that read, "Access is a right, not a privilege," and "Vincent Russo, stop hiding behind lawyers." Vincent himself gave a press conference, flanked by his legal team, delivering a carefully crafted statement about respecting all customers while maintaining the right to make operational decisions in the best interest of his business. He portrayed himself as a victim of internet mob justice, claimed Jack and Claire were exploiting the situation for attention and money, suggested that Marcus Webb's accusations were motivated by greed rather than genuine grievance. "I've built my reputation over 30 years, Vincent said to the cameras, his expression arranged in wounded dignity. "I've served this community, employed hundreds of people, donated generously to local charities. And now my life's work is being destroyed by opportunists who see a chance to profit from manufactured outrage. I refuse to be bullied into admitting wrongdoing I didn't commit." Jack watched the press conference from his living room, Mia curled against his side, and felt rage warring with something like pity. Vincent genuinely seemed to believe his own narrative, that he was the wrong party, that the discrimination was imaginary or at least justified, that standing up for disability rights was actually an attack on his freedom. "He's lying, right?" Mia asked. "About you wanting money?" "Yes, sweetheart. He's lying." "Why do grown-ups lie so much? Miss Sarah said lying makes everything worse." Miss Sarah was right, but sometimes people lie because the truth makes them look bad, and they'd rather everyone else be wrong than admit they made a mistake. Mia processed this with 8-year-old logic. "That's dumb." "Yeah," Jack agreed, pulling her closer. "Yeah, it really is." The countersuit was filed formally 3 days later. Jack, Claire, and Marcus Webb listed as plaintiffs. The charges included violations of the Americans with Disabilities Act, discrimination based on disability, intentional infliction of emotional distress, and a request for damages not just for the plaintiffs, but for every victim Vincent had paid to silence. Patricia was asking for $2 million, 10 times what Vincent was demanding from Jack, plus injunctive relief requiring Russo's to undergo comprehensive accessibility renovations and staff training. Vincent's response was swift and vicious. He amended his original lawsuit, now claiming that Jack, Claire, and Marcus were engaged in a conspiracy to destroy his business through false accusations. He accused Claire of using her wealth to manipulate the situation, suggested Jack was an absent father exploiting his daughter for sympathy, implied Marcus was an unstable veteran with grudges against successful business owners. The smear campaign spread through social media like wildfire. Anonymous accounts posted edited videos making Jack look aggressive, shared conspiracy theories about Claire's company financing a coordinated attack on Italian restaurants, claimed Marcus had a history of filing frivolous lawsuits. The ugliness of the internet's underbelly emerged fully, trolls and bigots and people who just enjoyed cruelty all piling onto the controversy. Jack's apartment building received calls from reporters and photographers camped outside trying to get statements. Mia's school had to implement new security procedures because of concerns about media harassment. Claire's company stock briefly dipped as investors worried about negative publicity. Marcus received death threats from people claiming he was disrespecting veterans by playing the victim. Through it all, Patricia remained grimly optimistic. "This is Vincent panicking," she explained during one of their strategy sessions. "He's throwing everything at the wall, hoping something sticks. But panic means he knows he's losing. Confident people don't need smear campaigns." The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. A journalist named Sarah Chen, who'd been covering the story for the Portland Tribune, published an investigation revealing that Vincent had ignored a city compliance order to install proper accessibility features at Russo's. 5 years ago, building inspectors had cited him for inadequate ramps and bathrooms that violated ADA standards. Vincent had been ordered to make corrections within 6 months. He'd paid the initial fine and then simply ignored the order. The city had never followed up, and Vincent had continued operating a non-compliant business for half a decade. The article included photos of Russo's current layout: narrow doorways, steps without ramps, bathrooms too small for wheelchair access, alongside the original compliance order documenting exactly what needed to change. It was damning evidence that Vincent's discrimination wasn't accidental or based on legitimate safety concerns. It was willful, calculated, and backed by the assumption that disabled customers simply wouldn't matter enough for anyone to enforce the law. Public opinion shifted dramatically overnight. Even people who'd been defending Vincent's right to run his business as he saw fit had trouble justifying 5 years of ignored safety violations. City officials, suddenly aware that their lack of enforcement had enabled ongoing discrimination, launched an investigation into why the compliance order had been dropped. The mayor gave a press conference promising comprehensive review of accessibility code enforcement across all Portland businesses. And Vincent Russo, facing the disintegration of his carefully maintained reputation, made a catastrophic mistake. He agreed to a televised interview. Jack watched the interview live, sitting in Patricia's office alongside Claire and Marcus. They'd gathered there because Patricia wanted them all together when Vincent either destroyed himself or somehow salvaged his position, and she'd bet heavily on destruction. The interviewer, a sharp-eyed woman from a national news program, started gentle, letting Vincent tell his side of the story, express his frustrations about internet justice, portray himself as a reasonable man caught in an unreasonable situation. Vincent leaned into it, his media training evident in every carefully modulated response. Then the interviewer shifted gears. "Mr. Russo, we've obtained documents showing you paid settlements to at least 5 individuals who claimed discrimination at your restaurant. Can you explain those payments?" Vincent's smile flickered. "Those were nuisance settlements. People make frivolous complaints, and sometimes it's cheaper to pay them to go away than to fight in court. It doesn't mean I did anything wrong, but the complaints all follow the same pattern. Disabled individuals refused service, offered money in exchange for non-disclosure agreements. Doesn't that suggest something more systematic? It suggests that some people see disability as a lottery ticket. They go looking for situations they can exploit, then demand payment to avoid false accusations." Vincent's mask was slipping, irritation bleeding through. "I run a business, not a charity. I have to make decisions based on what's best for all my customers, not just one person's demands for special treatment." Jack felt Claire stiffen beside him. Marcus muttered something profane under his breath. The interviewer leaned forward slightly. "Special treatment? Access for disabled individuals isn't special treatment, Mr. Russo. It's a civil right protected by federal law. And I respect that law. But the law also allows business owners to make reasonable accommodations. Sometimes those accommodations conflict with the experience other customers expect when they come to a fine dining establishment." "Are you saying disabled customers interfere with other customers' dining experience?" "I'm saying that when someone demands extensive modifications, when their presence requires my staff to rearrange the entire restaurant, when their equipment takes up space that could accommodate other parties. Yes, that impacts the experience, and I have to weigh one person's demands against the comfort and expectations of everyone else." The interviewer's expression remained neutral, but her eyes had gone predatory. "Mr. Russo, are you aware that your restaurant has been in violation of ADA accessibility standards for 5 years? That you ignored a direct order from building inspectors to make your establishment compliant?" Vincent's face flushed. That order was excessive. The modifications they wanted would have cost hundreds of thousands of dollars and fundamentally altered the character of my restaurant. I paid the fine. That should have been the end of it. But it wasn't the end, was it? Because paying a fine doesn't exempt you from compliance. The law still requires accessibility features, and you've chosen not to provide them. Why? Because my restaurant is a historic building with architectural constraints. Because the modifications would destroy the aesthetic that makes Russo's special. Because Vincent caught himself, but the damage was done. Because I built something beautiful, and I refuse to let bureaucratic overreach destroy it. Even if that means excluding disabled people? It's not about exclusion. It's about preservation. It's about maintaining standards. Vincent's voice rose, his composure cracking. You want me to apologize for running a successful business? For creating an experience that people value? For refusing to let activists and ambulance chasers dictate how I operate my own establishment? Jack watched Vincent unravel on national television, watched him transform from measured businessman to angry bigot in real time, and felt a strange mixture of satisfaction and sadness. This was what happened when privilege met accountability. When someone who'd never had to justify their prejudices suddenly faced questions they couldn't deflect or buy their way out of. The interviewer wasn't done. Mr. Russo, you're currently suing Jack Reynolds for defamation because he called you a bigot. After this conversation, after hearing you describe disability accommodations as demands for special treatment and disabled customers, as potentially interfering with others' dining experience, do you still believe that characterization was false? Vincent stared at her, seeming to realize too late how thoroughly he'd condemned himself. This interview is over. He stood, tearing off his microphone, and walked off the set while cameras continued rolling. The interviewer turned to face the camera directly. That was Vincent Russo, owner of Russo's restaurant in Portland, Oregon, currently facing multiple lawsuits for disability discrimination. Mr. Russo declined to continue our conversation. Patricia paused the recording, turned to face them with undisguised satisfaction. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is what we call a confession. Claire was crying quietly, her hands pressed to her face. Marcus had gone very still, his jaw clenched. Jack felt something loosening in his chest, the tight knot of fear and doubt he'd been carrying since that night at the restaurant finally beginning to unravel. He really believes it, Claire said through her tears. He genuinely thinks he's right, that accessibility is oppression, that disabled people are problems to be managed, that his aesthetic matters more than human dignity. People like Vincent always believe they're right, Patricia said gently. That's what makes them dangerous, but it's also what makes them beatable. He just admitted on national television that he views disability accommodations as burdens, that he's willing to violate federal law to maintain his restaurant's character, that he sees disabled customers as lesser than his other patrons. Any jury in the country would convict him based on that interview alone. So what happens now? Jack asked. Now Vincent's lawyers have a very bad day trying to explain that interview to a judge. Now the Department of Justice gets involved because he essentially confessed to willful ADA violations. Now city officials scramble to explain why they didn't enforce compliance orders. And now, Patricia's smile was sharp. We win. The fallout from Vincent's disastrous interview was immediate and spectacular. By the next morning, every major news outlet had picked up clips of him dismissing disability accommodations as burdensome and calling accessible design a destruction of his restaurant's aesthetic. Social media exploded with a fury that made the original video's virality look modest by comparison. Hashtags like #RussoExposed and #accessibility. Matters trended nationally. Disability rights organizations issued statements condemning Vincent's attitudes. Even politicians who normally avoided controversial social issues felt compelled to weigh in, calling for stricter enforcement of ADA regulations. Jack woke to find his phone flooded with messages again, but this time the tone was different. People weren't just thanking him for standing up. They were celebrating what felt like the beginning of real change. Former Russo's employees started coming forward anonymously, sharing stories about Vincent's treatment of disabled customers they'd witnessed over the years. One waiter described being ordered to tell a woman with a service dog that the animal wasn't allowed because it made Vincent uncomfortable. A hostess recalled Vincent instructing her to book wheelchair users only during off-peak hours when their presence would be less noticeable to other guests. The testimonies painted a picture of systematic discrimination that went beyond isolated incidents into deliberate policy, unwritten but clearly understood by everyone who worked there. Patricia collected every statement, every email, every scrap of evidence that Vincent had created an entire culture of exclusion at his restaurant. 3 days after the interview, Jack received a call from the Department of Justice's Civil Rights Division. A federal prosecutor named Amanda Morrison wanted to meet with him, Claire, and Marcus to discuss potential criminal charges against Vincent for willful violation of the Americans with Disabilities Act. Criminal charges, not just civil liability, but the possibility of Vincent facing actual prosecution for his discriminatory practices. They met in a downtown federal building, ushered into a conference room where Amanda Morrison waited with files spread across the table. She was younger than Jack expected, maybe early 40s, with the kind of focused intensity that suggested she took civil rights violations very personally. "Thank you all for coming," Amanda said, shaking each of their hands before gesturing to the seats. "I've been reviewing your case, and I want to be direct with you. What Vincent Russo has done, the pattern of discrimination, the ignored compliance orders, the NDAs used to silence victims, this rises to the level of criminal conduct under federal law. The ADA includes criminal penalties for willful violations, and Mr. Russo's own statements make it clear his actions were knowing and intentional." "Criminal penalties?" Claire repeated, surprise evident in her voice. "I thought ADA cases were civil matters." "Most are. But when there's clear evidence of willful and egregious violations, when someone deliberately flouts the law and actively works to cover up their discrimination, criminal prosecution becomes an option. Vincent's interview gave us probable cause. His history of ignored compliance orders and payoffs gives us a pattern. Your testimonies give us victims." Amanda's expression was grim but determined. "I want to build a case that sends a message, that discriminating against disabled Americans has real consequences beyond just paying settlements." Jack felt something like vindication mixed with apprehension. He'd wanted Vincent held accountable, but criminal prosecution felt enormous, the kind of consequence that would follow Vincent for the rest of his life. "What would that look like?" Marcus asked. "Criminal charges, I mean. What happens to him?" "If convicted, Vincent could face up to a year in federal prison for each willful violation. Given the pattern we're seeing, we could potentially charge him with multiple counts. More realistically, he'd probably accept a plea deal, admission of guilt, significant fines, mandatory restitution to victims, permanent oversight of his business practices, and community service focused on disability awareness." Amanda paused, gauging their reactions. "But here's what I need from you. I need you willing to testify, not just in the civil case, but in a criminal trial. I need you prepared for Vincent's lawyers to attack your credibility, your motives, everything about you. Criminal cases have a higher burden of proof, and Vincent will fight this with everything he has." "I'm in," Marcus said immediately. "I didn't come this far to back down now." Claire looked at Jack, her expression asking a question he understood without words. This would mean more media attention, more scrutiny, more of their lives dissected publicly. It would mean taking the battle from civil court into criminal prosecution, raising the stakes to levels that felt almost surreal. Jack thought about Mia getting into a fight at school because some child had parroted his father's bigotry. He thought about all the disabled people who'd been turned away from restaurants and stores and spaces that should have welcomed them, who'd been made to feel like inconveniences rather than customers. He thought about Sarah, who'd spent her last months fighting a body that was betraying her, and how she'd hated the pitying looks almost as much as the cancer itself. "I'm in too," Jack said quietly. "Whatever it takes to make sure Vincent can't do this to anyone else." Amanda smiled, the expression transforming her serious features. "Good, because I'm going to need all three of you at your strongest. Vincent's legal team is already preparing their defense, and from what I'm hearing, they're planning to argue that Vincent's statements were taken out of context, that the compliance issues were bureaucratic misunderstandings, that the settlements were acts of goodwill rather than admissions of wrongdoing." "How do they explain 5 years of ignored orders?" Claire asked. "They'll claim the modifications requested were structurally impossible, that the building's historic status prevented compliance, that Vincent made good faith efforts, but faced insurmountable obstacles. It's all nonsense. We have engineers who can testify that the modifications were entirely feasible, but it's the kind of nonsense that sounds plausible to people who want to believe Vincent's the victim here. Over the next 2 hours, Amanda walked them through what a criminal prosecution would entail: the investigation process, the grand jury, the trial itself. She explained how Vincent's lawyers would try to separate the criminal charges from the civil lawsuit, arguing they were separate matters requiring different standards of proof. She outlined the defense strategies they should expect: character assassination, procedural challenges, attempts to exclude evidence or testimony. By the time they left the federal building, Jack's head was spinning with legal terminology and strategic considerations. He felt like he'd been drafted into a war he hadn't chosen but couldn't abandon, fighting battles on multiple fronts with consequences he was only beginning to understand. Claire caught his arm as they reached the parking garage. "You okay? You've been quiet since we left Amanda's office." "I'm wondering what I've gotten us into. Criminal prosecution, federal cases, all of this because I couldn't keep my mouth shut in a restaurant." Jack leaned against his car, exhaustion settling into his bones. "Part of me keeps thinking there has to be an easier way, that maybe we should have just accepted Vincent's original offer to drop everything if I apologized. And taught Mia that bullies win if you're not rich enough to fight them? That standing up for people costs too much?" Claire moved her wheelchair closer, her expression fierce. "Jack, I know this is hard. God knows it's harder than anything I expected when I walked into Russo's that night. But we're doing something that matters. We're not just fighting Vincent. We're fighting every business owner who thinks disability accommodations are optional, every person who sees wheelchairs as inconveniences, every system that lets discrimination slide because enforcement is too much trouble." "I know, I do. Jack rubbed his face, feeling the stubble he'd forgotten to shave that morning. "I'm scared. Of losing. Of what this is doing to Mia. Of how much bigger this keeps getting. I'm just a delivery driver, Claire. I shouldn't be the person leading some civil rights crusade." "You're not leading it. You're part of it. There's a difference." Claire reached out, took his hand. Her grip was warm, steady, grounding. "And you're not just a delivery driver. You're a father teaching his daughter about courage. You're a decent man who saw something wrong and refused to look away. That's not nothing, Jack. That's everything." Marcus rolled up in his wheelchair, having taken a call outside the garage. "Patricia wants us at her office tomorrow morning. Vincent's lawyers have requested a settlement conference. They want to negotiate." Jack and Claire exchanged glances. "They want to settle?" Jack asked. "After everything Vincent said publicly about fighting this? After that interview tanked his reputation and the DOJ started a criminal investigation? Yeah, I'd say Vincent's lawyers are strongly suggesting he cut his losses." Marcus's expression was sardonic. Funny how principles become flexible when federal prison enters the conversation. The settlement conference took place in a neutral location, a law office in downtown Portland that specialized in mediation. Vincent arrived with 3 lawyers, all wearing identical expressions of grim determination. He looked older than he had at the restaurant, his face drawn, dark circles under his eyes suggesting sleepless nights spent watching his empire crumble. Jack, Claire, and Marcus sat on one side of the long conference table with Patricia. Vincent and his legal team occupied the other side. A mediator, a retired judge named Harold Chen, sat at the head, his role to facilitate negotiation and hopefully reach some resolution that didn't require months of litigation. "Before we begin," Judge Chen said, his voice carrying the weight of decades on the bench, "I want to establish ground rules. This is a settlement conference, not a trial. We're here to find common ground, not to litigate grievances. Both parties will have opportunities to present their positions, but personal attacks and inflammatory language will not be tolerated. Is that understood?" Everyone nodded. Vincent stared at the table, refusing to meet anyone's eyes. Vincent's lead attorney, a man named Douglas Pemberton, who wore his expensive suit like armor, spoke first. "Your Honor, my client is here in good faith to resolve these unfortunate misunderstandings. Mr. Russo has built his reputation over 3 decades serving the Portland community. He's an award-winning restaurateur, a generous philanthropist, and a respected businessman. The recent allegations against him are based on misinterpretations and selectively edited footage that don't reflect the full context of isolated incidents." Patricia raised an eyebrow but said nothing, letting Pemberton continue. My client maintains that he has never intentionally discriminated against anyone. The incidents in question involved legitimate business concerns, safety issues, capacity constraints, operational challenges. Mr. Russo has always been willing to make reasonable accommodations, but he cannot be expected to fundamentally alter his establishment for individual demands that compromise the experience of other patrons. That's a lie, Marcus said flatly, breaking the measured tone of the conference. He called me a crippled soldier. He told me my wheelchair reminded his customers of unpleasant things. There was no safety concern, no capacity issue, just bigotry dressed up in polite language. Pemberton's expression remained neutral. Mr. Webb, I understand you have strong feelings about this situation. However, the conversation you describe occurred 7 years ago and is disputed by my client. Without corroboration, it becomes a matter of he said, he said. Except there are 5 other people Vincent paid to keep quiet about similar conversations, Claire interjected. That's not he said. He said, that's a pattern. Those were nuisance settlements, Pemberton countered. My client chose to resolve minor disputes rather than engage in costly litigation. That's standard business practice, not an admission of wrongdoing. Judge Chen raised a hand. Let's move past arguing about the merits of the underlying claims. We're here to discuss resolution. Mr. Pemberton, what is your client offering? Pemberton glanced at Vincent, received a slight nod, and pulled out a document. Mr. Russo is willing to make the following concessions. First, he will drop all legal action against Mr. Reynolds, including the defamation and interference claims. Second, he will issue a public statement acknowledging that misunderstandings occurred and expressing his commitment to serving all customers. Third, he will donate $50,000 to a disability rights charity of the plaintiff's choosing. And fourth, he will implement accessibility training for his staff within 6 months. The offer hung in the air, simultaneously substantial and insulting. Vincent would pay money, say some words, and train his employees, but he wouldn't admit wrongdoing, wouldn't acknowledge discrimination, wouldn't accept responsibility for years of systematic exclusion. And what does he want in return? Patricia asked, though her tone suggested she already knew. The plaintiffs dropped their civil lawsuit, agree to make no further public statements about Mr. Russo or his business, and cooperate with Mr. Russo's legal team in requesting the Department of Justice close its criminal investigation. He wants us to silence ourselves and derail the federal case, Claire said, her voice sharp with anger, in exchange for some money and a meaningless apology. The apology would be public and sincere, Pemberton insisted. My client recognizes that mistakes were made in how certain situations were handled. Stop calling it situations, Jack interrupted, his patience finally snapping. Call it what it was. Vincent discriminated against disabled people. He refused them service because of their disabilities. He paid them to stay quiet about his discrimination. He ignored federal law requiring accessibility. And when he got caught, he tried to sue me into silence. Those aren't situations. Those are crimes. Vincent finally looked up, his eyes meeting Jack's across the table. For a moment, something like genuine emotion flickered across his face. Anger, yes, but also fear, confusion, the bewilderment of a man who genuinely couldn't understand how his world had inverted so completely. You destroyed my life, Vincent said, his voice hoarse. You took one moment, one conversation, and you turned it into a crusade that's cost me everything. My reputation, my business, my peace of mind. Do you have any idea what it's like to watch something you built for 30 years collapse because of a viral video? Do you have any idea what it's like to be refused service because of how you sit? Claire shot back. To be told you're making people uncomfortable just by existing, to know that society sees your wheelchair before it sees you? I never said. You said exactly that. On national television. You said disability accommodations were burdens. You said accessible design would destroy your restaurant's aesthetic. You literally argued that your decor mattered more than human dignity. Claire's voice shook with fury. Don't you dare act like you're the victim here, Vincent. You victimized people for years, and the only thing Jack destroyed was your ability to keep doing it without consequences. Enough, Judge Chen said firmly. This is becoming counterproductive. Let's take a 15-minute break so everyone can collect themselves. They reconvened in separate conference rooms. Jack, Claire, Marcus, and Patricia huddled in a small office down the hall, tension thick enough to taste. We're not taking that offer, Marcus said immediately. $50,000 and a fake apology? That's insulting. Agreed, Claire said. Vincent hasn't learned anything. He just wants this to go away so he can go back to discriminating quietly. Patricia nodded slowly. I think you're right, but I want to make sure you understand what rejecting this offer means. It means prolonged litigation, potentially years of court battles. It means the criminal trial proceeds, which could be brutal for all of you. Vincent's lawyers will get more aggressive, the media attention will intensify, and there's no guarantee we win. Juries can be unpredictable. Judges can make unexpected rulings. Taking this offer would give you certainty, closure, and some measure of justice. But not enough justice, Jack said. Not the kind that changes anything. Vincent would pay some money, say some words, and in a year everyone would forget. He'd still own that restaurant. He'd still have power. He'd still be able to hurt people, just more carefully next time. So what do we want? Patricia asked. What would constitute real justice here? They spent the next 10 minutes debating, negotiating among themselves, trying to articulate what would feel like genuine accountability rather than just damage control. By the time Judge Chen called them back to the main conference room, they'd reached consensus. We have a counteroffer, Patricia announced once everyone was seated. The plaintiffs are willing to settle the civil case under the following conditions. 1. Vincent Russo admits publicly and unequivocally that he discriminated against disabled individuals in violation of federal law. Not misunderstandings or situations, actual discrimination. 2. He pays $400,000 in restitution divided equally among all verified victims, including any who come forward after today. 3. Russo's restaurant undergoes immediate and comprehensive accessibility renovations at Vincent's expense, overseen by independent inspectors who report directly to the city. 4. Vincent steps down from day-to-day management for a minimum of 2 years, during which time the restaurant operates under an independent manager trained in disability inclusion. Pemberton's expression had gone from confident to alarmed. That's absurd. You're asking my client to essentially admit criminal conduct and give up control of his own business. We're asking him to take responsibility and prevent future harm, Patricia continued calmly. Additionally, the plaintiffs will not interfere with the Department of Justice's criminal investigation. That proceeds independently, and Vincent faces whatever consequences the federal government deems appropriate. This isn't a settlement offer, it's a surrender demand, Pemberton objected. My client would be better off taking his chances in court than accepting these terms. Then take your chances, Marcus said. Go to trial, put Vincent on the stand, let a jury hear him explain why wheelchair accessibility would ruin his precious aesthetic. See how that works out for you. Vincent was pale, his hands trembling slightly on the table. He leaned close to Pemberton, whispering urgently. His lawyer listened, frowned, whispered back. The other two attorneys joined the huddle, a quiet conference happening while Jack, Claire, and Marcus waited in tense silence. Finally, Vincent pulled back, his expression defeated. What if I agree to everything except stepping down from management? It's my restaurant. I can make the changes, implement the training, ensure compliance, but asking me to give up control, that's destroying everything I've built. Everything you've built is based on excluding people, Claire said quietly. Maybe it needs to be rebuilt by someone who understands that accessibility isn't optional. I can learn. I can change. Vincent's voice cracked slightly. I know I've made mistakes. I know I've hurt people. But I've spent 30 years building Russo's. It's not just a business. It's my life's work. Don't take that away from me. Jack studied Vincent across the table, trying to find sympathy for a man who'd threatened to sue him into poverty, who'd called disabled people burdens, who'd built a career on exclusion. Part of him wanted to refuse any compromise, to demand maximum consequences and watch Vincent lose everything the way so many of his victims had lost dignity and access and the simple right to exist in public spaces. But another part, the part that sounded like Sarah reminding him that vengeance and justice weren't the same thing, wondered if there was space for redemption. If Vincent genuinely wanted to change, if he could transform his restaurant into a model of accessibility, would forcing him out accomplish anything except satisfying their anger? What do you think? Jack asked, turning to Claire and Marcus. Is there a version of this where Vincent stays involved but under supervision? where he has to prove he's changed rather than just walking away? Claire considered this, her expression conflicted. Marcus looked skeptical but thoughtful. Maybe, Claire said slowly, if Vincent agrees to active oversight, not just inspections but regular audits by disability rights organizations. If he commits to making Russo's a showcase for accessibility, not just meeting minimum standards but exceeding them. If he does community service, real service, working with disabled individuals, learning what their lives are actually like. And if he screws up even once, if there's even a hint of discrimination or non-compliance, he's out permanently, Marcus added. No second chances after the second chance. Patricia looked at Judge Chen, who nodded slightly. That could work as a framework for settlement. Vincent remains involved but under strict oversight, with immediate removal if he violates any terms. The question is whether Mr. Russo would accept those conditions. All eyes turned to Vincent, who sat hunched in his chair, looking smaller somehow than the man who'd sneered at Claire in his restaurant doorway. He was quiet for a long moment, and Jack wondered if he was calculating costs and benefits, weighing pride against consequences, or genuinely grappling with what he'd done and who he'd been. I'll do it, Vincent said finally. All of it. The admission, the restitution, the renovations, the oversight. I'll work with disability organizations, do community service, prove that I can be better than I was. But please, let me try to fix this. Let me make Russo's into something I can actually be proud of. The negotiations continued for another 2 hours. Lawyers hammering out specific language, defining terms, establishing enforcement mechanisms. By the time Judge Chen called for a final break, they had a settlement framework that felt like actual accountability rather than just conflict avoidance. $400,000 in restitution, public admission of discrimination, comprehensive accessibility renovations costing an estimated $300,000 more, 2 years of intensive oversight by a disability rights committee with the power to remove Vincent if he violated any term, monthly audits, quarterly reports, annual reviews. Vincent would keep his restaurant, but he'd run it under conditions that would transform it fundamentally. Before we finalize this, Judge Chen said, I want to hear from each plaintiff that they genuinely accept these terms. This is your case, your choice, your future that's being negotiated. Mr. Reynolds, we'll start with you. Jack looked at Vincent, sitting defeated across the table, then at Claire and Marcus beside him, then down at his own hands, calloused from years of carrying packages, scarred from that night Mia had tried to teach him to cook, and he'd burned himself on the oven. Ordinary hands that had somehow pushed a button that started an avalanche. I accept, he said quietly, not because I think Vincent's fully learned his lesson, but because I think this gives him a genuine chance to, and because the oversight mechanisms mean that if he hasn't learned, he loses everything anyway. This isn't about punishment, it's about preventing future harm. If this settlement does that, then I'm satisfied. Ms. Donovan, Judge Chen prompted. I accept as well, Claire said. With the understanding that the Disability Rights Committee overseeing Russo's will include actual disabled individuals, not just advocates. Vincent needs to work with people like me, learn from people like me, until he genuinely understands that our access isn't a favor he's granting, but a right he was denying. Mr. Webb? Marcus was quiet longer than the others, his jaw working as he wrestled with 7 years of silence and resentment. I spent 7 years regretting that I took Vincent's money and kept quiet. I told myself I'd never get another chance to hold him accountable, that his privilege and power meant he'd always get away with what he did to me and others. This settlement gives me something I didn't think possible, real consequences, real change, and real hope that what happened to me won't happen to someone else. So yeah, I accept. But Vincent, he looked directly at the restaurant owner. If you screw this up, if you waste this chance, I will personally make sure everyone knows. No NDAs this time. No silence. You'll have to live with your choices publicly, permanently. Vincent nodded slowly, meeting Marcus's eyes. Understood. And Marcus, I'm sorry. For what I said, for how I treated you, for making you feel like your service and sacrifice meant nothing because of your wheelchair. I can't undo that, but I can try to do better going forward. The apology landed awkwardly, insufficient to the harm, but genuine enough to suggest Vincent was beginning to understand the weight of what he'd done. Marcus didn't respond, just nodded once, accepting the words, if not forgiving the actions that required them. Judge Chen looked at Vincent. "Mr. Russo, do you accept the settlement terms as negotiated?" "I do," Vincent said quietly. "And I'll honor them. All of them." They signed the papers that afternoon, making the settlement legally binding. Vincent's public statement would be released within 48 hours, his restitution payments distributed within 30 days, his renovations beginning immediately under the supervision of the newly formed Oversight Committee. The civil lawsuit was officially resolved, though the criminal investigation would continue independently, with Amanda Morrison determining whether federal charges were still warranted given Vincent's cooperation and admission. As they left the mediation office, stepping out into Portland's gray afternoon, Jack felt exhausted relief wash over him. It wasn't quite victory, too complicated for simple triumph, but it was something. Accountability, consequences, change. The beginning of justice, even if not its completion. Claire rolled alongside him toward the parking garage, her expression thoughtful. "We did it. We actually did it." "Some of it, anyway," Jack said. "The criminal case is still pending. Vincent could still face charges. But he admitted what he did, publicly, and he's paying for it, literally and figuratively." Claire stopped her wheelchair, looked up at Jack with something like wonder. "Do you realize what we've started? Portland's reviewing accessibility enforcement citywide because of this. The DOJ is investigating other businesses for similar violations. Disability rights organizations are using this case as a template for accountability. We didn't just stop Vincent, we created a blueprint for stopping people like him." Marcus had caught up with them, his wheelchair navigating the garage's slight incline with practiced ease. "Patricia says this settlement could become precedent, that other victims of disability discrimination might use it as leverage in their own cases. We're not just getting justice for ourselves, we're making justice more possible for everyone who comes after." The weight of that realization settled over Jack like unexpected snow. He'd stood up in a restaurant because his daughter was watching and his conscience demanded it. He'd refused to back down because doing so felt like betraying every value he'd tried to teach Mia. And somehow, through viral videos and lawsuits and media storms and federal investigations, that simple act of decency had transformed into something that mattered beyond his small life. "I need to pick up Mia from school," Jack said, checking his watch. "Want to come with me? Both of you? I think she'd like to hear that her dad's fight is over. Well, mostly over." They drove together, Jack's Honda leading, Claire and Marcus following in their adapted vehicles. The school parking lot was clearing out when they arrived, parents collecting children, the daily rhythm of ordinary life continuing around them. Jack spotted Mia sitting on the front steps with her backpack, waiting with her usual patience. When she saw the three of them approaching, her face lit up with uncomplicated joy. "Claire, Marcus, what are you guys doing here?" "We came to tell your dad something important," Claire said, smiling, "and we thought you should hear it too." They found a quiet spot under a tree on the school grounds, and Jack explained the settlement in 8-year-old appropriate terms. Vincent had admitted he was wrong. He was going to fix his restaurant and make it welcoming for everyone. He was paying money to the people he hurt, and there would be people watching to make sure he kept his promises. "So the bad guy said he was sorry and has to be better now?" Mia summarized, her face scrunched in concentration. "Essentially, yeah," Marcus said, grinning. "And you don't have to fight anymore? No more lawsuits or scary phone calls?" "No more lawsuits," Jack confirmed. "Well, there's still some stuff the government is handling, but the part where we're directly involved, that's finished." Mia processed this information with the gravity it deserved, then looked up at her father with those serious brown eyes that still sometimes surprised him with their wisdom. "Did we win, Daddy?" Jack thought about that question, about victory and justice, about compromise and accountability, about the difference between defeating an enemy and changing a system. They hadn't destroyed Vincent, hadn't seen him imprisoned or bankrupted or publicly destroyed beyond recovery, but they'd forced him to admit his discrimination, to compensate his victims, to transform his business into something fundamentally different than it had been. "Yeah, sweetheart," Jack said softly, pulling his daughter close. "I think we did." That evening, after Mia was asleep, Jack sat on his small apartment balcony with a beer he'd been saving for something worth celebrating. His phone buzzed with a text from Claire. "Thank you for everything. For standing up for me, for fighting beside me, for showing me that not everyone sees the wheelchair first." Jack typed back, "Thank you for teaching me that courage isn't the absence of fear. It's deciding something matters more than the fear." A moment later, another text. "Tomorrow, when all this media attention dies down and life goes back to normal, would you maybe want to get coffee? Just coffee, nothing dramatic, no lawsuits or settlements or cameras. Just two people who've been through something strange together and might want to see if there's something besides crisis connecting them." Jack stared at the message, his heart doing complicated things in his chest. Over the past weeks, through the stress and battles and late-night strategy sessions, he'd gotten to know Claire Donovan in ways that had nothing to do with wheelchairs or wealth or viral videos. He'd learned that she collected first-edition mysteries, that she laughed at terrible puns, that she remembered obscure facts about ancient Rome and could quote entire episodes of her favorite TV shows. He'd discovered that her competence in boardrooms coexisted with terrible cooking skills, that her fierce advocacy for disability rights came from deep wells of frustrated love for a world that didn't quite know how to include her. And somewhere in the middle of fighting for justice, he'd realized he was falling for her. Not because she was a millionaire CEO who could afford the best lawyers, not because she was the reason his life had become interesting and complicated, but because she was Claire, brilliant and funny and wounded and strong, seeing him as more than just a delivery driver the same way he saw her as more than her wheelchair. "Coffee sounds perfect," he typed. "Tomorrow at Marchetti's? I hear they have great cappuccino." Claire's response came almost instantly. "It's a date. Well, maybe a date. A potential date. A coffee that might become a date if we don't spend the whole time talking about Vincent Russo." Jack smiled at his phone, at this strange, brave woman who'd stumbled into his life at exactly the moment he needed reminding that standing up for others sometimes meant standing up for yourself too. Deal. No Vincent, just coffee and conversation and seeing what happens when our lives aren't actively on fire. The October wind picked up, carrying the smell of rain and possibility. Jack finished his beer, looked out over the modest view from his balcony, parking lots and streetlights and the distant glow of downtown Portland, and felt something unfamiliar settling into his bones. Hope, maybe. Or peace. Or just the simple understanding that sometimes doing the right thing doesn't destroy you. Sometimes it opens doors you didn't know existed, connects you to people you never would have met, transforms your ordinary life into something that matters beyond your small corner of the universe. His phone buzzed one more time. "Marcus Webb. Beer tomorrow? I'm buying. Figure we should celebrate properly. Me, you, and whoever else survived Vincent Russo's attempt to sue us into submission." Jack grinned, typed back an affirmative, and headed inside. Tomorrow there would be coffee with Claire, beer with Marcus, the continuing process of life after battle. Tomorrow the media attention would begin fading. The viral video would become yesterday's news. And Jack Reynolds would return to being an ordinary person rather than an accidental symbol of standing up to discrimination. But tonight, in the quiet of his apartment with his daughter sleeping safely down the hall, Jack allowed himself to feel satisfaction. Not pride, that felt too large for what he'd done, but satisfaction that when confronted with cruelty, he'd chosen compassion. When given the option to look away, he'd chosen to see. When threatened with consequences, he'd chosen courage. Miss Sarah would have been proud. Mia was definitely proud. And maybe, just maybe, Jack was learning to be proud of himself too. Not for being perfect or heroic or anything dramatic, but for being decent when decency was difficult. For standing up when sitting down would have been easier. For teaching his daughter through actions rather than words that some things matter more than comfort or safety or avoiding conflict. The viral video that had started everything was still out there, still accumulating views and comments and shares. Millions of people had watched Jack Reynolds confront Vincent Russo, had judged and analyzed and argued about what happened in that restaurant. Some called him a hero. Others called him a troublemaker. Most probably just scrolled past, momentarily engaged, and then moving on to the next piece of content in their endless feed. But for Jack, for Claire, for Marcus, And for every disabled person who'd been made to feel unwelcome in spaces that should have included them, the video was more than content. It was evidence. It was validation. It was proof that sometimes speaking up matters, that sometimes confronting cruelty changes things, that sometimes one person's courage can spark movements they never intended to start. Jack checked on Mia one last time before heading to bed, watching his daughter sleep with her report card still visible on her nightstand. The reason they'd gone to Russo's in the first place, the catalyst for everything that followed. Straight A's that deserved celebration, leading to a confrontation that deserved consequences, resulting in justice that deserved acknowledgement. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. The criminal investigation would continue. Vincent's transformation from bigot to reformed advocate would be tested. The Disability Rights Committee would begin its oversight. Claire's coffee invitation would become either a date or a friendship or something else entirely. Life would reassert its complexity, its constant demand for decisions and courage, and the willingness to keep showing up even when showing up was hard. But tonight, Jack Reynolds slept the sleep of someone who'd fought for something that mattered and lived to tell the tale. In the morning, he would wake up to a changed world, not perfect, not fixed, but maybe, just maybe, a little bit better than it had been before. The morning after the settlement, Jack woke to silence. The first morning in weeks without his phone erupting with notifications, without reporters camped outside his building, without the gnawing anxiety that Vincent's lawyers would find some new way to destroy his life. The quiet felt strange, almost suspicious, like the eye of a hurricane that might resume spinning at any moment. He made pancakes for Mia, drove her to school without incident, and found himself with 3 hours before his coffee date with Claire. Coffee date. The words felt foreign in his mouth, weighted with possibility he wasn't sure he was ready to hold. It had been 3 years since Sarah died, 3 years of focusing entirely on Mia and work and survival. 3 years of telling himself that romance was something for his past rather than his future. But Claire wasn't just romance. She was the woman who'd been brave enough to show up at Russo's alone, who'd fought beside him through lawsuits and media storms, who'd revealed her wealth not as leverage, but as vulnerability. She was brilliant and funny and understood loss in ways most people couldn't, and somewhere in the chaos of fighting Vincent Russo, Jack had started imagining what it might feel like to build something with her beyond just shared battle scars. His phone rang. Patricia Huang, her voice brisk and professional as always. Jack, quick update. The DOJ has decided not to pursue criminal charges against Vincent. Amanda Morrison called this morning to say that given his cooperation, his public admission, and the comprehensive settlement terms, they believe civil penalties are sufficient. Vincent won't face prison time. Jack processed this, trying to identify what he felt. Relief? Disappointment? Some complicated mixture of both? Is that good or bad? He asked. It's practical, Patricia said. Criminal trials are expensive, time-consuming, and would have required you, Claire, and Marcus to testify under incredibly hostile cross-examination. This way, Vincent faces real consequences without putting you through more trauma. The settlement terms are actually more restrictive than anything a criminal court would have imposed. So it's really over? Completely? The legal battles, yes. What happens next is up to Vincent and whether he honors the settlement. The Oversight Committee starts work next week, and they've already received 3 more complaints from former Russo's customers willing to testify about discrimination they experienced. Vincent's about to learn that accountability is an ongoing process, not a one-time event. After Patricia hung up, Jack sat in his car outside Marchetti's, watching Claire through the window. She was already there, sitting at a corner table with 2 cappuccinos, her wheelchair positioned at an angle that suggested she'd been thinking about accessibility even in this moment. She looked nervous, her fingers drumming on the table, her eyes scanning the entrance like she was afraid he might not show up. Jack climbed out of his Honda, straightened his shirt, a different button-down, green this time, because blue felt too much like recreating that first night, and walked inside. Maria, the owner, saw him and beamed, hurrying over to kiss both his cheeks like he was returning family. Jack, and with Claire, I see. So beautiful, you two. Sit, sit. I bring you something special. She winked with the subtlety of a freight train and disappeared toward the kitchen. Claire smiled as Jack slid into the seat across from her. I think Maria's decided we're a couple. She's been giving me knowing looks since I arrived. Maria thinks everyone should be a couple. She tried to set me up with her niece last year, twice. Jack wrapped his hands around the cappuccino, grateful for something to hold. So, we're really doing this? Having coffee without lawyers or lawsuits or Vincent Russo as conversational buffer? Terrifying, right? Claire's smile was nervous but genuine. I realized last night that I know everything about your legal strategy and nothing about your favorite movie. That most of our conversations have been crisis management rather than actual getting to know you stuff. Well, favorite movie is easy, The Princess Bride. Sarah and I watched it probably 50 times, and now Mia insists on quoting it constantly. Last week she told a kid at school that his behavior was inconceivable. Claire laughed, the sound warm and unguarded. That's perfect. Mine's When Harry Met Sally, which I'm sure says something profound about my romantic optimism, or lack thereof. I've watched it alone so many times I can recite entire scenes. They fell into conversation more easily than Jack expected, trading stories about childhood and college, embarrassing moments and proud achievements, the small details that transform strangers into actual people. Claire talked about growing up in her father's company, watching him build Donovan Industries from a garage startup into a tech empire, learning business strategy before she learned algebra. She described the accident that killed her father and paralyzed her with painful honesty, the way grief and disability had arrived simultaneously, how she'd spent years untangling which losses were about the wheelchair and which were about losing the person who'd understood her best. Jack shared his own grief, Sarah's diagnosis, the brutal 18 months of treatments that didn't work, the strange empty space her absence had left in his life. He talked about Mia, about single fatherhood, about the constant fear that he was somehow failing to be enough parent for a daughter who deserved two. "You're not failing," Claire said softly, reaching across the table to touch his hand. "I've met Mia. She's confident, kind, brave, smart, everything a parent could hope for. You're doing better than enough, Jack. You're doing remarkably." The touch of her hand sent electricity up Jack's arm, a reminder that he had a body capable of wanting things beyond basic survival. He turned his palm up, threading his fingers through hers, watching Claire's expression shift from nervous to hopeful. "I don't know how to do this," Jack admitted quietly. "Dating, or whatever this is. Sarah was my high school sweetheart. I've never had to figure out romantic feelings as an adult, and everything about our situation is complicated. Your wealth, my poverty, the media attention, the fact that we met because someone discriminated against you. So we figure it out together," Claire said. Slowly, honestly. With the understanding that complicated doesn't mean impossible, just means we need to pay attention. She paused, vulnerability flickering across her face. "Jack, I need you to understand something. Money makes people strange around me. Either they want it, or they resent it, or they treat me like a charity project. I need to know that you see me as Claire, not as a bank account or a cause or a way to solve your financial problems. I see you as the woman who makes Mia laugh, who quoted legal precedent like poetry during strategy sessions, who admitted she's terrible at cooking with the same confidence most people reserve for accomplishments." Jack squeezed her hand gently. "The money is part of your life, sure, but it's not what I think about when I think about you. Mostly I think about how brave you were that night at Russo's, how you could have just left and let Vincent win, but you stayed and fought because you knew someone needed to." Claire's eyes were wet now, tears threatening to spill. "I was terrified. I'm always terrified when I go places alone, wondering if this will be the restaurant or store or venue that decides I'm not worth accommodating. And then you stepped forward, and for the first time in years, I didn't feel alone in that fear." Maria arrived with plates of tiramisu neither of them had ordered, set them down with theatrical flourish, and disappeared again before they could protest. The dessert sat between them like an offering, sweet and rich, and completely unnecessary, but somehow exactly right. They stayed at Marchetti's for 3 hours, talking until Maria started giving them pointed looks about needing the table for lunch customers. When they finally left, stepping out into Portland's late-morning drizzle, Jack walked Claire to her car, an adapted van with controls she could operate from her wheelchair. "So," Claire said, rain dotting her hair, her expression hopeful and scared in equal measure, "was this a date?" Or coffee that might become a date? Or just two people who've been through trauma bonding over cappuccino? Jack thought about Sarah, about the promises he'd made at her bedside that he'd live fully after she was gone, that he'd show Mia what love looked like, even when it was scary and uncertain and nothing like the fairy tales suggested. He thought about the past weeks, about standing up for Claire not because he was attracted to her, but because it was right, and how that foundation of integrity felt like something solid enough to build on. It was a date, he said firmly, and I'd like there to be more dates. If you want that too. I want that too, Claire said, her smile transforming her entire face. Though maybe next time, somewhere without Maria watching our every move like a matchmaking hawk. Deal. I'll plan something. Somewhere accessible, somewhere quiet, somewhere we can just be Jack and Claire instead of viral video guy and millionaire CEO. Claire laughed, then grew serious. Jack, before this goes further, there's something else you should know. Vincent's not the first person who's discriminated against me. This wheelchair, it's a filter that reveals who people really are. Some see it and immediately dismiss me as broken or tragic. Others fetishize it, treating me like inspiration porn. Very few see past it to the actual person. You did that, from the first moment. You saw me being treated unjustly and responded to the injustice, not the wheelchair. That's rare enough to be precious. You're not your wheelchair any more than I'm my car keys, Jack said. You're Claire, smart, fierce, occasionally terrifying in business meetings, according to Marcus, and apparently really bad at cooking. The chair is part of how you navigate the world, but it's not who you are. Most people don't understand that distinction. Then most people are idiots. Jack smiled. But I think we established during the Vincent situation that there are a lot of idiots in the world. They said goodbye with a kiss that started tentative and became something more, a promise of possibility, an acknowledgement of connection, a recognition that something was beginning between them that had nothing to do with lawsuits or settlements or viral videos. Just two people who'd met during crisis and discovered they wanted to know each other during peace. Jack drove home with the lightness in his chest he hadn't felt in 3 years, turned on music loud enough that his neighbors probably judged him, and allowed himself to feel hopeful about his future in ways that extended beyond just surviving until Mia turned 18. That evening, he met Marcus at a bar downtown, a place Marcus had chosen specifically because it was fully accessible, with wide aisles and an accessible bathroom, and staff trained not to treat wheelchair users like inconveniences. So, Marcus said, ordering them both local IPAs, I hear you had coffee with Claire this morning. Maria texted me about it. Apparently you two were adorable together, and she's already planning the wedding. Jack groaned. Maria needs a hobby that isn't matchmaking. She's Italian, and she runs a restaurant. Matchmaking is the hobby. Marcus grinned. But seriously, how'd it go? You two figuring out if there's something real there beyond shared trauma? I think so. Maybe. It's early, and everything about our situation is weird, but... Jack paused, trying to articulate feelings he was still discovering. I like her, Marcus. Really like her. Not because she funded my legal defense or because we fought Vincent together, but because she's funny and smart and honest in ways that feel rare. Being with her doesn't feel like work. It feels like possibility. Good. You deserve that, both of you do. Marcus took a long pull from his beer. You know what's strange? I spent 7 years angry at Vincent, at myself, at a system that let discrimination slide. That anger became part of my identity. Marcus Webb, the Marine who got screwed over and couldn't fight back. But now? Vincent's admitted what he did, paid restitution, lost control of his restaurant. I got justice. And I don't know what to do with myself without that anger to carry around. Build something new, Jack suggested. That's what Patricia said when I asked her about what happens after justice. She said the hard part isn't winning, it's figuring out who you are when you're not defined by fighting anymore. Wise woman. Marcus was quiet for a moment, then, I've been thinking about starting a support group for veterans with disabilities dealing with discrimination. There are a lot of us, and most don't have millionaire CEOs funding their legal battles. What if we created a network, shared resources, helped each other navigate a world that still largely treats accessibility as optional? That's brilliant. And if you need help getting it started, connections, resources, whatever, Claire would probably be thrilled to support it through her company. See, that's the thing, though. Marcus's expression grew thoughtful. I don't want it to be charity. I want it to be veterans helping veterans, disabled people supporting disabled people. Not from pity or obligation, but from genuine understanding of what it's like to navigate a world that wasn't designed with us in mind. They talked for hours about Vincent's settlement, about the oversight committee beginning its work, about the 3 additional victims who'd come forward with their own stories of discrimination at Russo's, about justice and accountability and the difference between punishment and rehabilitation, about whether Vincent could genuinely change or if his compliance was just strategic self-preservation. I think people can change, Jack said eventually. Not easily, not quickly, but possible. Vincent built his entire identity around that restaurant, around being successful and respected. Losing that, or nearly losing it, might be enough to break through his prejudices. Or it might just teach him to hide them better. Time will tell. And if he doesn't change, if he violates the settlement, then he loses everything. The oversight committee has real power. One verified incident of discrimination, and Vincent's out permanently. Jack finished his beer. But I almost hope he does change, not for his sake, but because it would prove that accountability works, that consequences can transform people, that standing up to bigotry doesn't just stop individual bigots, but creates opportunities for growth. Marcus nodded slowly. You're more optimistic than me. But then, you didn't spend 7 years watching Vincent get away with discrimination. You confronted him once and he folded. I confronted him once and he bought my silence. Different experiences, different perspectives. Fair enough. But Marcus, you're confronting him now. You testified. You helped build the case. You're part of why he's facing consequences. That matters. Your 7 years of silence doesn't erase the courage of speaking up now. Your wife sounds like she was a wise woman too, Marcus said. The things you say, the way you see the world, I can hear her influence in your words. Jack felt the familiar ache of missing Sarah, but it was gentler now, worn smooth by time and acceptance. She was, and she'd probably tell me to stop overthinking things with Claire, to just enjoy getting to know someone without catastrophizing every complication. Then maybe listen to her, even if she's not here to say it directly. Marcus signaled for another round. To Sarah, to justice, and to figuring out who the hell we are now that the war's over. They clinked glasses. 2 men who'd been strangers until a viral video connected them, now friends bound by shared battle and the strange camaraderie that emerges from fighting together against institutional cruelty. The weeks that followed developed their own rhythm, distinct from the chaos that had preceded them. Jack returned to his delivery routes, grateful for the mindless physicality of carrying packages and the anonymity of being just another driver in a company truck. The viral video was fading from social media feeds, replaced by newer controversies and conflicts. People stopped recognizing him at grocery stores. Life was reasserting its ordinary contours. But some things had changed permanently. Jack received messages almost daily from people sharing their own experiences with discrimination, thanking him for speaking up, asking for advice on how to fight back against businesses that violated accessibility laws. He forwarded most to Patricia or disability rights organizations, but occasionally he'd respond directly, offering encouragement and the contact information for lawyers who might help. Mia was thriving in ways that surprised him. The incident with Tyler Henderson had somehow elevated her status at school. She was the girl whose dad had stood up to a bully, the girl brave enough to punch someone defending hatred. Her teacher called Jack in for a conference, not to discuss discipline, but to say that Mia had started a club at recess focused on teaching kids about different kinds of disabilities and why accessibility mattered. 8-year-olds were making posters about wheelchair ramps and learning basic sign language and asking complicated questions about why the world wasn't designed for everyone. "Your daughter is remarkable," the teacher said, pride evident in her voice. "She's turning a difficult situation into education, using her experience to teach empathy. That's extraordinary emotional intelligence for her age." Jack drove home from that conference with tears in his eyes, overwhelmed by the realization that standing up at Russo's hadn't just affected him and Claire and Marcus. It had shaped his daughter's understanding of justice, given her a framework for thinking about fairness and courage that would influence the rest of her life. He was teaching her, yes, but she was teaching others. The ripple effects were expanding in directions he couldn't track, couldn't measure, couldn't fully comprehend. His relationship with Claire deepened with surprising ease. They went on dates, real dates, planned and intentional, exploring Portland's accessibility together and laughing at how poorly designed so many spaces were for wheelchair users. They discovered shared love of terrible movies and fierce Scrabble competition, and the specific joy of finding restaurants where staff treated Claire like any other customer rather than either a tragedy or an inconvenience. 3 weeks after their first coffee date, Claire invited Jack and Mia to dinner at her house, a sprawling property in the West Hills that made Jack's apartment look like a storage closet by comparison. Mia's eyes went wide as they drove through the gates, up a long driveway lined with trees toward a modern house that was all glass and clean lines and expensive taste. "Claire lives here," Mia breathed. "It's like a castle, but fancier." "Claire's very successful," Jack said carefully, trying to prepare his daughter for the wealth gap without making it seem like an insurmountable barrier. "But she's still just Claire, okay? Same person we had dinner with at Marchetti's." Claire met them at the door, wearing jeans and a casual sweater that somehow cost more than Jack's monthly grocery budget, but looked comfortable rather than pretentious. She'd clearly tried to make the space less intimidating, dimmed the lighting, put out casual snacks, set the table with regular plates instead of whatever fancy china probably lived in her cabinets. "Welcome to my ridiculously oversized house," she said, smiling nervously. "I keep meaning to downsize, but my father designed this place with accessibility in mind, and most houses aren't nearly as accommodating." The interior was beautiful, but also clearly functional. Wide doorways, no steps, everything at wheelchair height. It was luxury designed around disability rather than despite it, and Jack found himself appreciating the thoughtfulness even as he tried not to calculate how many years of his salary it would take to afford even a fraction of this space. Mia was less intimidated, immediately asking Claire for a tour and chattering enthusiastically about the elevator and the swimming pool and the library that had more books than their local branch. Claire indulged her patiently, showing off the house without making it feel like showing off, answering Mia's questions about accessibility features with genuine enthusiasm. "See this counter?" Claire pointed to the kitchen island, which was lower than standard height. "It's designed so I can cook from my wheelchair, which is good in theory, except I'm terrible at cooking, so mostly I use it to set takeout containers on." "Daddy's terrible at cooking too," Mia said confidentially, "but he tries really hard. Last week he made spaghetti and only burned the garlic bread a little bit." Jack felt his face heat. "In my defense, the oven timer is broken." "In his defense," Claire said, conspiring with Mia, "cooking is genuinely difficult and anyone who tries deserves credit, which is why tonight I ordered from an excellent Thai place that delivers. No burnt garlic bread, just reliably delicious takeout." They ate dinner on Claire's back patio, spring rolls and curry and pad thai, consumed while Mia asked a million questions about Claire's work, her chair, her house, whether she had any pets, and if she'd consider getting a dog because Mia had always wanted a dog, but their apartment didn't allow them. "I've thought about it," Claire admitted. "But I travel a lot for business, and it wouldn't be fair to the dog. Maybe someday when I'm more settled." After dinner, Mia excused herself to explore the library, leaving Jack and Claire alone on the patio with wine and the sound of Portland's evening settling around them. The view from Claire's house was spectacular, city lights spreading out below them, Mount Hood visible in the distance, the kind of vista that reminded Jack exactly how different their financial situations were. "This is intimidating," Jack said quietly. "Not you, not Mia being here, but—" He gestured vaguely at the house, the view, the casual wealth represented by every carefully chosen detail. "I drive a 15-year-old Honda. My apartment is 400 square feet. I budget carefully to afford Mia's school supplies. And you live in what's basically a museum designed around accessibility." Claire set down her wine glass, her expression serious. "Jack, I need you to hear something. This house, the money, Donovan Industries, none of it defines my worth any more than your Honda defines yours. I didn't earn this wealth. I inherited it from my father, who built the company. I manage it. I try to use it responsibly, but I'm not successful because I'm special or brilliant or better than anyone else. I got lucky in the genetic lottery of having a father who was both wealthy and thoughtful enough to leave everything structured so I could access it despite my disability. But it still creates this gap between us. I can't afford to take you to places like this. I can't offer you the lifestyle you're accustomed to. I don't want lifestyle, Claire interrupted. I want connection. Jack, do you have any idea how exhausting it is to never know if people like you or your bank account? To wonder if every compliment is genuine or strategic? You stood up for me before you knew anything about my money. You fought beside me because you believed in justice, not because you wanted access to my resources. That's rare enough to be precious. But practically, we figure it out. I don't expect you to match my income. You don't resent me for having resources you don't. We build something based on who we are as people, not what we have in our bank accounts. Claire reached for his hand. And if it helps, I find your Honda significantly less pretentious than the luxury cars every other CEO drives. It's honest, like you. Jack laughed despite his anxiety. You're romanticizing my poverty. I'm appreciating your authenticity. There's a difference. Claire squeezed his hand. Jack, I've dated plenty of wealthy men. They were boring, pretentious, and mostly interested in either my company's stock value or the inspiration porn story of the disabled woman who succeeded despite her limitations. You're the first person in years who sees me as just Claire. That matters more than matching tax brackets. Mia reappeared then, clutching a book she'd borrowed from the library, and the conversation shifted to lighter topics. But later, driving home through Portland's streets, Jack thought about what Claire had said. About authenticity and connection, about the difference between wealth and worth, about building relationships on foundations more stable than financial compatibility. Maybe she was right. Maybe love didn't require matching resources, just matching values and the willingness to navigate differences with honesty. Maybe the gap between his delivery driver salary and her CEO income could be bridged by integrity and humor and genuine affection. Or maybe he was being naive, and the real complications would emerge later when practical realities intruded on romantic optimism. Time would tell. The Oversight Committee's first report on Russo's arrived 6 weeks after the settlement. Jack read it in Patricia's office, Claire and Marcus present, all of them curious about whether Vincent was actually honoring his commitments or just performing compliance. The report was thorough and surprisingly positive. Vincent had begun renovations immediately, widening doorways, installing proper ramps, redesigning bathrooms to meet ADA standards, lowering counters, and reconfiguring table spacing to accommodate wheelchair users. The work was expensive and extensive, fundamentally altering the restaurant's layout in ways that suggested genuine commitment rather than minimal effort. More impressive were the staff training records. Vincent had hired a disability rights consultant to conduct comprehensive workshops for every employee, covering everything from appropriate language to practical accommodation strategies. The consultant's notes indicated that Vincent himself had attended every session, asked thoughtful questions, and seemed genuinely engaged rather than just checking boxes. He's trying, Patricia said, reviewing the report. Whether he's trying because he's genuinely changed or because he's terrified of losing everything is debatable, but the effort is real. Have there been any complaints? Claire asked. Any incidents that suggest he's falling back into old patterns? None reported to the committee. In fact, Patricia flipped to another page. There are 3 positive testimonials from disabled customers who've visited Russo's since renovations began. They describe staff as attentive and accommodating, Vincent as personally welcoming, the experience as significantly better than most Portland restaurants. Marcus looked skeptical. So Vincent's performing progressive values until the oversight period ends and he can go back to business as usual? Maybe. Or maybe facing consequences genuinely shocked him into recognizing how wrong he'd been. Patricia closed the file. I've seen both outcomes. Some people change because they get caught and realize the cost of their behavior. Others just get better at hiding it. We won't really know which Vincent is until the oversight ends and he's no longer being watched. The conversation turned to strategy. How to ensure Vincent's changes were permanent. What monitoring would look like after the official oversight period concluded. How to create accountability structures that didn't require constant legal intervention. Jack found himself impressed by how seriously the committee was taking its responsibility. how determined they were to transform Vincent's settlement from punishment into actual systemic change. After the meeting, Claire invited Jack to dinner, just the two of them, Mia having a sleepover at a friend's house, the rare adult evening stretching ahead with possibility. They chose a small French restaurant that Claire insisted was both delicious and fully accessible, arriving to find the staff genuinely welcoming rather than performing accommodation. The meal was excellent, the wine smooth, the conversation flowing easily from Vincent's progress to Mia's school project to Jack's amusing encounter with a customer who'd tried to claim his package contained something other than the adult toys clearly labeled on the shipping invoice. Somewhere between dessert and coffee, the conversation shifted to something more serious. "Jack," Claire said carefully, "I need to tell you something about Donovan Industries, about the work we do and why it matters to me beyond just business." "Okay," Jack said, noting the nervousness in her voice. "After the accident, after I lost my father and found myself paralyzed, I went through this period of rage. Not just grief, but anger at how poorly designed the world was for wheelchair users. Inaccessible buildings, unusable technology, constant barriers that able-bodied people never even noticed. My father's money meant I could afford adaptive equipment, personal assistance, modifications to our home, but most disabled people can't afford those things. They're stuck navigating a world that treats their existence as an afterthought." Claire paused, gathering her thoughts. "My father started Donovan Industries to change that, to create affordable adaptive technology, to push for universal design principles, to prove that accessibility isn't expensive or difficult, it's just deprioritized. When he died, I inherited not just a company, but a mission. Every product we develop, every partnership we create, every advocacy effort we fund, it's all aimed at building a world that works for everyone, not just the able-bodied majority." "That's incredible," Jack said softly. "And also explains why you were so calm during the lawsuit. You've been fighting Vincent Russo's your whole professional life." "In a way, yes. But Jack, here's the thing. I want to expand that fight. Use the publicity from our case to launch a comprehensive accessibility audit program across Portland. Partner with the city to identify and fix ADA violations before they become discrimination incidents. Create a certification system that recognizes businesses going beyond minimum compliance. Essentially, turn what happened at Russo's from an isolated victory into a blueprint for systemic change." "That sounds expensive," Jack said carefully. "It would be. Millions of dollars expensive. But I can afford it, and more importantly, I think it's necessary. The question is whether you'd be comfortable with me using our case as the foundation for this work. Your name, your story, your defense of me. It's all part of what made this issue visible. I don't want to exploit that without your permission." Jack thought about this, about his name and face becoming permanently associated with disability rights advocacy, about the responsibility that would come with being a public symbol of standing up to discrimination. "Will it help people?" he asked. "Yes. Genuinely, measurably help create more accessible spaces and hold businesses accountable." "Then I'm in. Use the case, use my name, whatever helps. Just, can we protect Mia as much as possible? She's already dealt with enough attention." "Absolutely. We'll be thoughtful about privacy, careful about exposure. But Jack, this could be big, really big. A model program that other cities could replicate. Your moment of courage at Russo's could become the catalyst for nationwide change." The weight of that possibility settled over Jack like unexpected snow. He'd stood up in a restaurant to teach his daughter about justice. He'd fought Vincent's lawsuit to prove that bigotry had consequences. And now Claire was offering to transform that private act into public infrastructure, to build systems that would prevent future Vincent Russos from discriminating with impunity. "Okay," Jack said finally. "Let's do it. Let's build something that outlasts both of us." Claire's smile was radiant. "Thank you for standing up that night, for fighting beside me, for being willing to let our story become something bigger than just us. You're remarkable, Jack Reynolds." "I'm really not. I'm just a guy who couldn't look away when someone was being treated badly." "That's exactly what makes you remarkable. Most people can look away. Most people do. You chose differently, and that choice is changing the world in ways you're only beginning to understand." They left the restaurant hand in hand, walking slowly through Portland's spring evening. Somewhere above them, stars were hiding behind city lights. Somewhere ahead, the future was taking shape. Donovan Industries launching its accessibility initiative, Portland implementing comprehensive audits, disabled individuals across the country hearing about the settlement and finding courage to demand their own rights. But in that moment, Jack was just a man holding hands with a woman he was falling for, learning that sometimes standing up for others means standing beside them as partners, that justice isn't a destination but an ongoing process, that love can bloom in the strangest soil if you're brave enough to tend it. "I'm glad I met you," Jack said quietly. "Even though meeting me nearly bankrupted you and got you sued and turned your life upside down? Especially because of that. You taught me that my ordinary life could matter, that standing up when it's hard is how ordinary people create extraordinary change, that courage doesn't require being fearless, just deciding something matters more than the fear." Claire stopped walking, turned her wheelchair to face him directly. "Jack Reynolds, I'm falling in love with you. It's too soon and too complicated and probably too fast, but I needed you to know." Jack's heart did something complicated in his chest. He thought about Sarah, about the promise he'd made to live fully after she died. He thought about Mia, who'd been asking increasingly pointed questions about whether Claire was his girlfriend. He thought about all the rational reasons to slow down, to be cautious, to protect himself from heartbreak. And then he thought about standing in Russo's restaurant, choosing courage over comfort, and how that single decision had transformed his entire life. "I'm falling in love with you too," he said. "And you're right, it's too soon and definitely too complicated. But I'm done letting fear make my decisions. I'm done playing it safe because safe feels easier than brave." They kissed under Portland's streetlights. Two people who'd met through crisis and discovered connection, who'd fought battles together and were now learning to build peace together. The path ahead was uncertain, the complications real, the differences between them obvious and undeniable. But sometimes uncertainty is where possibility lives. Sometimes complications make the story interesting. Sometimes the differences between people create the space for growth rather than barriers to connection. And sometimes, just sometimes, a single moment of courage in a restaurant can cascade into love, justice, and the kind of change that outlasts everyone involved in creating it. 6 months after that kiss under Portland's streetlights, Jack found himself standing in the newly renovated Russo's restaurant, surrounded by people who'd been strangers before a viral video connected them into something like family. The space had been transformed beyond recognition. Gone were the narrow doorways and pretentious exclusivity, replaced by wide aisles, accessible seating at every level, and an atmosphere that somehow managed to feel both elegant and genuinely welcoming. Vincent Russo stood near the entrance, greeting guests with an uncertainty that suggested he was still learning how to be humble. The Oversight Committee had arranged this reopening event as both celebration and test, a public demonstration of whether Vincent's transformation was genuine or merely strategic. Disability rights activists mingled with former victims, reporters documented everything, and the city's accessibility coordinator observed with the careful attention of someone ready to pull permits if anything seemed performative rather than authentic. Claire rolled up beside Jack, her wheelchair navigating the space with an ease that would have been impossible 6 months ago. "He actually did it," she said, wonder evident in her voice. "Vincent really rebuilt this place around accessibility rather than just meeting minimum requirements. The question is whether he understands why," Marcus said, joining them with a beer in hand. He'd been watching Vincent carefully all evening, looking for signs of the man who'd called him a crippled soldier, trying to reconcile that memory with the restaurant owner who'd just spent 5 minutes enthusiastically explaining adaptive menu formats to a blind customer. As if summoned by their attention, Vincent approached their group. He looked older than he had at the settlement conference, humbled by 6 months of comprehensive oversight, exhausted by renovation costs that had exceeded even his worst projections, but also somehow more real. The polish that had made him seem untouchable had been stripped away, leaving someone who looked recognizably human rather than simply successful. "Jack, Claire, Marcus, thank you for coming," Vincent said, his voice careful. "I know my invitation probably felt complicated, but I wanted you here. Needed you here, really, to see what your fight created." "Your discrimination created this," Marcus corrected, his tone not quite hostile but nowhere near friendly. "We just made sure there were consequences." "You're right, absolutely right." Vincent didn't deflect or defend himself. I spent 30 years building a business around exclusion without even realizing it. Told myself I was maintaining standards, preserving atmosphere, protecting an experience. But really, I was just protecting my comfort, my aesthetic preferences, my inability to see disabled people as customers deserving the same experience as everyone else. So what changed? Claire asked. Was it the lawsuit, the media attention, the threat of losing everything? Vincent was quiet for a moment, considering the question with more honesty than Jack had expected. All of that initially, I was terrified and angry, convinced I was being persecuted for running my business as I saw fit. But then the disability rights consultant, Dr. Sarah Martinez, she had me spend a day in a wheelchair, just one day, trying to navigate Portland as someone with mobility differences. He paused, something like shame crossing his features. I couldn't get into my own restaurant, the building I'd owned for 30 years, that I'd designed personally, that I'd been so proud of. I couldn't access it. The ramps were too steep, the doors too narrow, the bathroom stalls impossible to navigate. And when I finally gave up and went somewhere else, I got stared at, pitied, treated like either a tragedy or an inconvenience by people who looked exactly like I used to look. One day, Marcus said flatly, you spent one day experiencing what we live with constantly, and suddenly you understand? No, I don't understand, not really. One day in a wheelchair doesn't teach me what it's like to be permanently disabled, to face discrimination constantly, to navigate a world designed without my existence in mind. But it taught me enough to recognize how profoundly wrong I'd been. How my standards were really just excuses for exclusion. How my resistance to accessibility modifications was really just selfishness dressed up in business language. Jack watched Vincent carefully, trying to assess whether this remorse was genuine or performed, whether 6 months had actually changed the man, or just taught him better words to avoid consequences. He thought about all the discussions he and Claire had had about redemption, about whether people could fundamentally transform or just learn to hide their worst impulses more effectively. Vincent, Jack said slowly, I appreciate what you're saying. I can see the physical changes you've made to this space. But I need to know, are you doing this because you've genuinely changed your beliefs about disabled people, or because the settlement forced you to and you're making the best of it? Vincent met his eyes directly. Honestly, it started as compliance, pure survival instinct, but somewhere in the process of renovation, of training, of actually listening to disabled customers explain what barriers they faced, it became something else. I started seeing people I dismissed as inconveniences as actual human beings with legitimate needs. I started feeling ashamed of the man I'd been, the harm I'd caused. I'm not asking for forgiveness. I don't deserve it. But I'm trying to become someone different than who I was that night I refused Claire entry. Try harder, Marcus said bluntly. Because words are easy, Vincent. I've heard apologies before, signed NDAs before, watched powerful men promise change before. Prove it through actions. Keep being this person when the cameras are gone and the oversight committee finishes its work. That's when we'll know if you've actually changed. I understand. Vincent nodded slowly. And I will. Not for redemption or forgiveness, but because it's right. Because running a business that excludes people is wrong, regardless of whether I get caught. Because I have grandchildren now, and I want them to inherit a restaurant they can be proud of, rather than ashamed of. An announcement called guests to their tables. The reopening dinner was beginning, with Vincent serving a special menu designed in consultation with the disability community to accommodate various dietary needs and dining methods. Jack, Claire, and Marcus were seated together at a table that would have been impossible 6 months ago. Spacious enough for wheelchairs, positioned for easy conversation, with menus available in multiple formats. Patricia Huang arrived late, sliding into the 4th seat with apologies about traffic. Sorry, got held up at the courthouse. But I have news that couldn't wait. The City Council just voted unanimously to implement the Portland Accessibility Initiative that Claire proposed. Full funding, 3-year pilot program, comprehensive audits of every business in the downtown corridor. Claire's face lit up with unrestrained joy. They approved it? Everything? Everything. Your presentation last month convinced them. The data about ADA violations, the cost-benefit analysis, the testimonials from disabled residents, it all came together perfectly. Portland's about to become the most accessible city on the West Coast, and it's because of what you four started in this restaurant. Jack felt something shift in his chest, satisfaction mixing with disbelief. The strange realization that standing up in this very room 6 months ago had cascaded into actual policy change. Not just Vincent's transformation, but systemic reform that would affect thousands of people, prevent countless incidents of discrimination, create a blueprint that other cities could follow. "This is bigger than Vincent," he said quietly. "Bigger than our lawsuit. This is real change." "This is what courage looks like when it compounds," Patricia said. Jack confronted discrimination. "You all fought the legal battle. Claire channeled the publicity into advocacy. The city recognized an opportunity to lead nationally. One action inspired another, which enabled another, creating momentum that transformed a viral moment into institutional reform." Mia would love this story, Jack thought. His daughter, who'd started an accessibility club at her school, who'd turned her father's confrontation into education, who understood at 8 years old that standing up for people created ripples extending far beyond the initial splash. He'd have to tell her tonight about the city council vote, about how her dad's scary moment in a restaurant had helped change laws. The dinner proceeded with surprising warmth. Vincent had clearly invested enormous effort into making the evening perfect. The food was exceptional, the service attentive without being obtrusive, and several disabled guests made a point of complimenting how genuinely accessible the experience felt. Not patronizing, not performative, just thoughtfully designed around diverse needs. Halfway through the main course, Vincent clinked his glass for attention. The restaurant quieted as he stood near the center of the room, clearly nervous but determined. "Thank you all for being here tonight," he began. "For those who don't know me, I'm Vincent Russo, and 6 months ago I was a bigot running a discriminatory business. I refused service to disabled customers, ignored accessibility laws, and paid people to stay quiet about my violations. I was wrong. Not misguided, not operating under different values. Wrong. Morally, legally, and humanly wrong." The directness of his admission created an uncomfortable silence. Jack saw several guests shifting in their seats, unsure how to respond to such blunt acknowledgement. "I can't undo the harm I caused," Vincent continued. "I can't give back the dignity I took from people who just wanted to eat dinner. I can't erase the years of discrimination or the trauma of being excluded. But I can do better going forward. This restaurant," he gestured around the renovated space, "is my attempt to build something that actually honors the Portland community instead of excluding parts of it." He turned to face Jack, Claire, and Marcus directly. "And to the people who held me accountable when I could have gotten away with discrimination, thank you. You gave me something I didn't deserve but desperately needed, a chance to become better than I was. I'm grateful, even though gratitude feels inadequate to what you endured to create that chance." "Pretty words," someone called from another table. A man in a wheelchair Jack didn't recognize. "But I was here 3 years ago, and your staff told me my chair would damage your floors. You offered me takeout instead of seating, so forgive me if I need more than renovations and an apology to believe you've changed." Vincent paled but didn't look away. "You're absolutely right, and I'm sorry, genuinely, deeply sorry for treating you that way. If you're willing, I'd like to cover your meal tonight and arrange a meeting where you can share your experience with my staff, so they understand the real harm that discrimination causes, so they never treat anyone the way I treated you." The man considered this, then nodded slowly. "Okay, but I'm holding you to that meeting, and if I hear about anyone else being treated the way you treated me, I'm coming back with lawyers." "Fair enough," Vincent agreed. "Anyone else here who experienced discrimination at Russo's in the past, please find me tonight. I want to hear your stories, make what amends I can, ensure you know that what happened was my failure, not your fault." The dinner continued with a different energy, more honest, less celebratory, but somehow more real. People began sharing their experiences with accessibility in Portland, both positive and negative. Disabled guests offered suggestions for further improvements Vincent could make. The conversation shifted from generic platitudes about inclusion to specific practical discussions about what genuine accessibility required. Jack found himself talking with a woman who'd been denied entry to Russo's 2 years ago because her service dog allegedly violated health codes. She described the humiliation of being escorted out while other diners watched, the assumption that she was lying about her dog's training, Vincent's condescending offer to make an exception if she provided extensive documentation proving her disability. "He made me feel like a criminal for having a disability," she said, anger still evident in her voice. "Like I was trying to scam my way into his precious restaurant instead of just wanting to eat dinner with my friends." "I'm sorry," Jack said, feeling inadequate. "That's inexcusable. And I'm sorry it took a viral video for there to be consequences. Don't apologize for him. You're not responsible for Vincent's bigotry." She smiled slightly. "But thank you for standing up when you did, for making it impossible to ignore. I'd given up on Portland's disability rights enforcement. Figured guys like Vincent would always get away with discrimination because they had money and connections. You proved that wrong." By the time dinner concluded, Jack had heard a dozen similar stories. Each one added weight to his understanding of what Vincent's discrimination had cost, how many people had been harmed over the years, how much damage could be inflicted by a single business owner who viewed accessibility as optional. The settlement suddenly felt less like adequate consequences, and more like barely scratching the surface of accountability. As guests began departing, Vincent approached their table again. "Jack, could I speak with you privately for a moment? You too, Claire and Marcus, if you're willing." They followed him to a quieter corner of the restaurant, curiosity mixing with wariness. Vincent pulled out an envelope, hands shaking slightly as he extended it toward Jack. "What's this?" Jack asked. "A check for $50,000. Made out to Mia's college fund." Vincent's voice was quiet. "I know money doesn't undo harm. I know this doesn't make us even or earn forgiveness. But your daughter, she's 8 years old and she's already teaching her classmates about disability rights. She's remarkable and she deserves every opportunity. Consider this an investment in her future and in the hope that her generation will be better than mine was." Jack stared at the check, feeling something complicated tangling in his chest. Accepting money from Vincent felt wrong somehow, like being paid off even though the settlement had already been resolved. But this wasn't for him. It was for Mia, for her education, for the future he was desperately trying to secure despite his delivery driver salary. "Vincent, I can't." "You can," Claire interrupted gently. "Jack, this isn't hush money or a bribe. The settlement's already concluded. This is Vincent trying to make amends in the only way he knows how. And Mia deserves this opportunity, regardless of your complicated feelings about where it's coming from." Marcus nodded agreement. "Take it. Put it toward her college. Let Vincent's discrimination at least fund education that'll create a more just world. There's a kind of poetic justice in that." Jack looked at the check again, thinking about Mia's dreams of becoming a veterinarian or astronaut, thinking about how financial stress constantly shadowed his parenting, thinking about Sarah's dying wish that their daughter have every chance to thrive. Accepting Vincent's money felt like compromise, but refusing it felt like pride getting in the way of Mia's future. "Okay," Jack said finally. "Thank you. I'll put it in her college fund. And Vincent, don't let this be the end of your transformation. Keep doing the work. Keep learning. Keep proving that people can change." "I will," Vincent promised. "I know I can't erase the past, but maybe I can build a future that matters more than my failures." They left Russo's together, Jack, Claire, Marcus, and Patricia, stepping out into Portland's summer evening. The sun was setting over the West Hills, painting the sky in oranges and purples, the kind of beautiful, ordinary moment that felt significant after everything they'd been through together. "We did it," Marcus said, shaking his head in disbelief. "We actually did it. Held a powerful man accountable, changed city policy, created a model for accessibility enforcement, started as 3 people pissed off about discrimination, and ended as activists who transformed Portland." "We started as people who refused to look away," Claire corrected. "The activism came later, built on that foundation of just giving a damn when it would have been easier not to." Patricia checked her phone, smiled. "Speaking of caring, the Portland Tribune just posted their feature on tonight's reopening. The headline is, 'From Discrimination to Dedication, How Public Accountability Transformed Russo's.' They're calling this a model for restorative justice in civil rights cases." "Restorative justice," Jack repeated. "Is that what this is? I thought we were just trying to stop Vincent from discriminating." You were. But in the process, you created space for transformation rather than just punishment. Vincent lost control temporarily, paid significant costs, faced public humiliation, but he also got opportunity to learn, to change, to become someone different. That's restoration rather than pure retribution. Patricia's expression was thoughtful. Not every case should work this way. Some people are genuinely irredeemable, but when someone shows genuine willingness to change, creating paths for that change serves justice better than destruction. They parted ways with promises to meet next week. Marcus wanted to celebrate the launch of his Veterans Support Network. Claire had tickets to a concert she'd been excited about for months. Patricia was hosting a dinner for civil rights attorneys to discuss using their case as a template. The connections that had been forged through fighting Vincent had become genuine friendships, the kind built on shared values and mutual respect. Jack drove home to find Mia still awake despite the late hour, reading in bed with her nightlight on. She looked up as he entered her room, excitement immediate in her expression. How was the dinner? Was the restaurant really all fixed? Did Vincent apologize? Did people like the new Russos? Jack sat on the edge of her bed, pulling his daughter into a hug. It was good, sweetheart. Really good. Vincent's changed a lot. The restaurant is completely accessible now, and the city council approved Claire's program to make all of Portland more welcoming to disabled people. Because you stood up for Claire that night? Because lots of people did lots of work. But yeah, it started that night, when I decided teaching you about courage was more important than keeping quiet. Jack pulled back to look at his daughter. Mia, I'm so proud of you. Your accessibility club at school, your understanding of why standing up matters, you're already changing the world. I learned from you, Daddy. You and Miss Sarah. She said we're supposed to be brave for people who can't be brave for themselves, and you showed me what that looks like. Jack felt tears threatening, the way they always did when Mia mentioned Sarah with such casual acceptance of loss. Your mom would be so proud of you, of both of us, I think. Do you think she knows? About Claire? About the lawsuit? About everything? I don't know, sweetheart, but I like to think she does. And I think she'd be happy that we're building a life that matters, that we're not just surviving, but actually making things better. Mia considered this seriously. I like Claire. She's smart and funny, and she treats me like a real person instead of a little kid. Are you going to marry her? The question, delivered with 8-year-old directness, caught Jack completely off guard. We've only been dating for 6 months, Mia. It's way too soon to talk about marriage. But you love her, right? And she loves you? Miss Sarah said that's what matters in marriage, loving someone and wanting to build a life with them. It's more complicated than that. Claire's a CEO with responsibilities I can barely understand. She has money and a lifestyle that's completely different from ours. Marriage would mean navigating those differences long term. So? Mia interrupted with the logic of someone who hadn't yet learned that love was supposed to be complicated. You're a delivery driver who stood up to a bigot. She's a wheelchair user who fights for disability rights. You're both brave and kind, and you make each other smile. The rest is just details. Jack laughed, surprised by his daughter's wisdom. When did you get so smart about relationships? I pay attention, and I read a lot. And Daddy? Mia's expression grew more serious. I know you worry about replacing Ms. Sarah, but loving Claire doesn't mean forgetting Mom. It means showing me that hearts can hold more than one person, that losing someone doesn't mean you stop loving anyone ever again. The tears spilled over now, Jack unable to contain the emotion flooding through him. His 8-year-old daughter, teaching him about grief and love, and the courage it took to open yourself to connection after loss. Sarah would have loved this moment, would have loved seeing their daughter grow into someone wise and compassionate and unafraid of complicated feelings. You're right, Jack said quietly, about all of it. I do love Claire, and I'm scared of what that means, of how it changes our life, of whether I'm ready. But maybe being scared is okay if I'm brave anyway. That's what Ms. Sarah always said. Being scared is normal. Being brave is choosing to do the thing anyway. Mia hugged him tightly. I think you should marry Claire. I think we should be a family, you and me and Claire. And maybe someday a dog, because Claire's house has a huge backyard, and she said she'd consider it. Jack laughed through his tears, holding his remarkable daughter, feeling gratitude for Sarah giving him this incredible human and for the universe being strange enough to bring Claire into their lives at exactly the moment they were ready for expansion. Get some sleep, sweetheart. Tomorrow's Saturday. I'm taking you to the zoo, and Claire's meeting us there if you want. We can talk more about families and futures and maybe, possibly, definitely getting a dog someday. 3 months later, on a crisp October evening, almost exactly a year after that first confrontation at Russo's, Jack took Mia and Claire to the small Italian restaurant where they'd first had dinner together. Marchetti's was still their favorite spot, unpretentious, welcoming, run by Maria, who'd been watching their relationship develop with unabashed joy and excessive matchmaking commentary. They ordered their usual dishes, fell into comfortable conversation about Mia's latest school project, and Claire's company's new adaptive technology launch, and Jack's promotion at work. The delivery company had made him a trainer, teaching new drivers about customer service and community engagement, with a significant raise that meant he could finally afford to move into a bigger apartment. Life was good. Not perfect. Still complicated, but genuinely good in ways Jack had stopped believing possible after Sarah died. After dinner, as Maria delivered tiramisu none of them had ordered, Jack pulled a small box from his pocket. His hands were shaking, his heart racing, but his resolve was steady. "Claire," he said, his voice surprisingly calm. "6 months ago, Mia asked if I was going to marry you. I told her it was too soon, too complicated, too many differences between us to navigate. But the thing is, I've been falling in love with you since the night I stood up for you at Russo's. Maybe before that, in the first 5 minutes of watching Vincent discriminate against you and feeling rage that anyone would treat you like you were less than human." He opened the box, revealing a simple ring, not expensive by Millionaire standards, but chosen with care and love and the understanding that Claire valued authenticity over ostentation. "You've taught me that courage isn't the absence of fear, that standing up for what's right matters more than staying safe. That love can grow in the strangest soil if you're willing to tend it. Claire Donovan, will you marry me?" Mia was bouncing in her seat, barely containing excitement, a massive smile splitting her face. Claire was crying, her hands pressed to her mouth, her eyes shining with tears that could have been joy or overwhelm or probably both. "Yes," she said, laughing and crying simultaneously. "Yes, absolutely yes. Jack Reynolds, you remarkable, courageous, utterly unexpected man. I love you. I love Mia. I love the life we're building together. Yes, I'll marry you." Jack slipped the ring on her finger, pulled her close for a kiss that tasted like tears and tiramisu and the particular joy of choosing love despite fear. Mia squealed. Maria shrieked from the kitchen and came rushing out with champagne. She'd apparently been keeping ready for exactly this occasion, and the entire restaurant erupted in applause. "We're getting married," Mia announced to everyone and no one, her voice carrying pure delight. "And we're going to be a family, and maybe get a dog." "Definitely getting a dog," Claire said, pulling Mia into their embrace. "A family needs a dog, and a bigger house where we all fit comfortably, and lots of love, which we already have in abundance." That night, after Mia was asleep in Jack's apartment, soon to be their former apartment, as they'd be moving into a house they'd choose together, Jack and Claire sat on his small balcony with wine and the comfortable silence of people who'd learned to be still together. "I can't believe this is real," Jack said quietly. "A year ago, I was just a delivery driver taking his daughter to celebrate good grades. Now I'm engaged to a CEO. I've helped change city policy. Vincent Russo's apologized to me, and my life has been completely transformed." "Our lives," Claire corrected. "Your courage changed my life too. Showed me that not everyone sees the wheelchair first, that genuine partnership is possible, that I could trust someone with my whole self instead of carefully curated pieces." What would have happened if I hadn't stood up that night, Jack wondered. If I'd just looked away, taken Mia somewhere else, let Vincent get away with discriminating against you. Then I would have gone home alone, cried in my enormous empty house, and added another incident to my mental list of reasons the world wasn't designed for people like me. You would have had a quiet dinner somewhere, tucked Mia into bed, and never known what you'd missed by staying silent. Claire took his hand. "But you didn't stay silent. You chose courage. And that choice cascaded into everything that came after. The lawsuit, the settlement, the policy changes, us. All because you decided teaching your daughter about justice mattered more than avoiding conflict. Sarah would have liked you, Jack said suddenly. She would have loved your intelligence, your advocacy work, the way you make Mia laugh. She would have been glad I found you. Tell me about her? Not just the grief parts, but the good parts. I want to know the woman who raised Mia and loved you and shaped who you became. So Jack told her about Sarah's terrible jokes and fierce loyalty, her battle with cancer and her deathbed wisdom, the way she'd prepared him and Mia for a future without her by teaching them that loss doesn't end love. It just transforms it. He talked about the guilt of moving forward, the strange permission Sarah had given him to live fully after she was gone, the way grief and joy could coexist without diminishing either. Claire listened without judgment or jealousy, understanding that honoring Jack's past was part of building their future. When he finished, she was crying quietly, mourning a woman she'd never met but whose legacy surrounded them. She gave you to me, Claire said softly, by teaching you to be brave, to stand up for people, to value courage over comfort. I'm grateful to her, for raising Mia to be remarkable, for loving you well enough that you learned how to love again, for releasing you to build a new life without guilt. They sat together until the stars emerged, visible despite Portland's light pollution, ancient light traveling unimaginable distances to reach them in this moment. Below them, the city continued its ordinary operations, people going home from work, restaurants serving dinner, lives being lived in all their complicated glory. Somewhere across town, Vincent Russo was closing his restaurant for the night, ensuring his staff had properly accommodated every customer, reviewing feedback forms and preparing for tomorrow's oversight committee check-in. His transformation wasn't complete, probably never would be, but it was real, ongoing, visible in daily choices to do better than he'd been. Somewhere else, Marcus Webb was leading his support group meeting. Veterans with disabilities sharing experiences and strategies, building community around their shared navigation of a world that still treated accessibility as optional. The network had grown beyond his expectations, chapters forming in other cities, his personal pain transforming into collective support. And in courtrooms and city councils and restaurants and schools across Portland, the ripples from that viral video continued spreading. New policies were being implemented. Old assumptions were being challenged. Disabled individuals were finding courage to demand their rights because they'd seen what happened when discrimination was confronted publicly. All of it, every policy change, every transformed business, every empowered individual, traced back to one October evening when Jack Reynolds decided that teaching his daughter about courage mattered more than avoiding conflict. One moment of choosing to see injustice rather than look away. One refusal to let discrimination pass unchallenged. The wedding took place 6 months later in Claire's backyard, now technically their backyard, as Jack and Mia had moved into the house after careful negotiations about maintaining some independence while building genuine partnership. The ceremony was small and perfect, officiated by Judge Harold Chen, who'd mediated their settlement conference and become an unexpected friend. Marcus served as Jack's best man, delivering a speech about courage and justice, and the strange ways the universe connects people who need each other. Patricia Huang stood beside Claire, her legal precision softened by genuine affection as she toasted the couple who'd transformed a discrimination case into a blueprint for change. Mia was Flower Girl, wearing a purple dress she'd chosen herself and clutching a basket of rose petals she'd scattered with artistic abandon. She'd written her own speech, delivered with 8-year-old solemnity about how families are built from love rather than blood, how Ms. Sarah would have loved Claire, how she was the luckiest girl in the world to have 2 amazing mothers, one in heaven and one in a wheelchair. Vincent Russo had been invited but declined to attend, sending instead a generous donation to Donovan Industries' accessibility initiative and a note expressing gratitude for the chance to become better than he'd been. His presence would have been complicated, his absence was respectful, and Jack appreciated the thoughtfulness of that choice. As Jack and Claire exchanged vows under Portland's spring sky, surrounded by people who'd witnessed their journey from crisis to connection, Jack thought about the viral video that had started everything. Millions of people had watched him confront Vincent Russo, had judged and commented and argued about what happened. But very few understood what came after, The lawsuits and settlements, the personal transformation and policy changes, the love that had grown from shared battle into genuine partnership. "I promise to stand beside you," Jack said, looking into Claire's eyes. "The way I stood up for you that night at Russo's. Not because you need defending, but because partnership means showing up when it matters. I promise to see you, not your wheelchair, not your money, not the CEO or the activist or any other label. Just Claire, brilliant and brave, and the person I want to build a life with." "I promise to be your partner in courage," Claire responded, her voice steady despite tears. "To remind you that ordinary people create extraordinary change when they refuse to look away from injustice. I promise to love Mia as my own, to honor Sarah's memory by being the best stepmother I can be, and to build with you a family that proves love transcends every difference society says should divide us." They kissed as husband and wife, surrounded by applause and tears and the particular joy of witnessing people choose love despite fear. Mia rushed forward to join the embrace, and they stood together, a family forged from loss and crisis, and the strange courage it took to open your heart when closing it felt safer. The reception continued into evening, Portland's summer warmth wrapping around them like a blessing. Jack danced with Claire, with Mia, with Patricia and Marcus and Maria from Marchetti's, who'd come despite not technically being invited because she considered herself responsible for their relationship. He laughed until his sides hurt, drank champagne that cost more than his monthly car payment, and felt gratitude so intense it threatened to overwhelm him. At one point, Marcus pulled him aside, both of them watching Claire and Mia laughing together across the yard. "You did it, man," Marcus said quietly. "Stood up for what's right and ended up with everything: justice, love, family, purpose. That's the fairy tale we tell ourselves is possible but rarely actually see." "I got lucky," Jack said. "Lucky that Claire walked into Russo's that night. Lucky that Patricia took our case. Lucky that Vincent actually changed instead of just performing compliance. Lucky that the city council listened. Luck is what happens when courage meets opportunity. You created the opportunity by standing up. Everything else followed from that choice." Marcus clinked his beer against Jack's champagne. "To courage, and to the family you've built from it." As the reception wound down and guests began departing, Jack found himself alone on the patio with Mia, watching stars emerge in Portland's darkening sky. His daughter was exhausted but happy, her flower girl dress grass-stained from playing with other children, her face glowing with contentment. "Are you happy, Daddy?" she asked quietly. "I'm very happy, sweetheart." "Are you?" "Yeah, I miss Ms. Sarah sometimes, but I think she'd be happy too, that we found Claire, that we're a family again, that we're brave together." Mia leaned against him, comfortable and trusting. "You know what Ms. Sarah told me before she died? She said that love doesn't run out, that her loving us didn't mean we couldn't love other people too, that hearts just get bigger to hold more people." Jack felt tears on his cheeks again. Seemed like he cried at everything these days, his emotions closer to the surface than they'd been before Claire, before fighting for justice, before learning that vulnerability could be strength rather than weakness. She was right about that. About a lot of things. She'd be proud of you, Mia, of the person you're becoming, of how you've handled everything life threw at us, of how brave you are. "I learned from the best," Mia said simply. "You and Ms. Sarah and now Claire. I'm lucky to have so many people teaching me about courage." The following morning, Jack woke in his new life. Married to Claire, living in a house that felt like home rather than just shelter. Mia sleeping peacefully down the hall in a bedroom 3 times the size of her old one. The promised dog, a rescue named Justice because Mia had a flair for dramatic symbolism, snored at the foot of their bed, already integrated into their family, despite having been adopted only 2 weeks ago. Claire stirred beside him, smiled sleepily. "Good morning, husband." "Good morning, wife." The words felt foreign and perfect simultaneously. "I can't believe we're actually married, that this is real." "Believe it. You're stuck with me now, and with Mia, and with Justice, who definitely needs to go outside before he has an accident on our very expensive rug." They fell into morning routines, coffee and breakfast, walking the dog, getting Mia ready for school, the ordinary rhythms of family life that felt extraordinary because they'd been hard-won. As Jack drove Mia to school, Passing through Portland's streets that felt transformed by everything they'd experienced together, his daughter asked a question that had clearly been percolating overnight. "Daddy, what do you think will happen with Russo's? Will Vincent keep being good, or will he go back to being mean once the oversight ends?" Jack thought about Vincent's evolution, about the man who'd discriminated with casual cruelty, and the man who'd spent his own reopening dinner listening to victims and making amends. "I don't know, sweetheart. People are complicated. Sometimes they change genuinely. Sometimes they just get better at hiding who they really are. But here's what I do know. We created systems that make it harder for Vincent to discriminate even if he wants to. The oversight committee, the city's new enforcement policies, the fact that people are paying attention now, that matters more than whether Vincent personally becomes a saint. So we didn't just stop one bad guy. We made it harder for all bad guys." "Exactly. We changed the rules so that disability discrimination has real consequences. That's better than just punishing one person. It's preventing future harm." Mia processed this seriously. That's what Ms. Sarah meant about changing the world. Not just fixing one thing, but making everything a little bit better. Jack pulled up to the school, kissed his daughter goodbye, watched her run toward the building with her backpack bouncing. She'd grown so much in the past year, taller physically, but more importantly, stronger emotionally, braver socially, more confident in her ability to stand up for what was right. That growth was worth every stressful moment of the lawsuit, every scary confrontation, every time Jack had doubted whether fighting was worth the cost. His phone buzzed with a text from Claire. "The Portland Tribune wants to do a 1-year anniversary piece on the case. Interview all of us, document Vincent's transformation, show the policy changes we inspired. What do you think?" Jack typed back, "I think we tell our story, not for fame or recognition, but because maybe it helps someone else find courage to stand up when they see discrimination. Maybe it shows people that ordinary actions can create extraordinary change." Claire's response was immediate. "I love you, Jack Reynolds. Your courage changed my life. Our courage." "We did this together," Jack replied. "You, me, Marcus, Patricia, Mia, everyone who refused to look away. That's the real story. Not one hero, but a community deciding discrimination was unacceptable." The anniversary article ran 2 weeks later, comprehensive and thoughtful, documenting not just the legal battle but the personal transformations it catalyzed. Jack was quoted extensively, talking about teaching Mia about courage and how standing up once had cascaded into systemic change. Claire discussed Donovan Industries' accessibility initiative and the dozens of businesses that had voluntarily improved their compliance rather than wait for enforcement. Marcus shared how the Veterans Support Network had grown to 15 chapters across 5 states, each one helping disabled veterans navigate discrimination and advocate for their rights. And Vincent Russo, interviewed in his transformed restaurant, spoke with unexpected honesty about his journey from bigot to advocate. "I can't undo the harm I caused," Vincent said in the article. "I can't give back dignity to people I humiliated or erase memories of discrimination. But I can keep doing better every day, keep learning from the disability community, keep making my restaurant genuinely welcoming rather than just legally compliant. That's not redemption. I don't deserve that. But it's growth. And maybe growth is enough." The article concluded with a quote from Judge Chen, who'd mediated the settlement. "This case represents the best possible outcome in civil rights litigation. Not just punishment, but transformation. Not just stopping one bigot, but changing systemic enforcement to prevent future discrimination." Jack Reynolds' moment of courage created ripples that will benefit disabled individuals for generations. That's what justice looks like when it's done right. Life continued its forward motion. Jack thrived in his new training position, discovering he had genuine talent for teaching customer service and community engagement. Claire's accessibility initiative expanded beyond Portland, becoming a national model that cities across America were replicating. Marcus's support network kept growing, his personal pain transmuted into collective empowerment. Mia continued teaching her classmates about disability rights, her accessibility club now an official school program with faculty support. And somewhere in the middle of all that forward momentum, Jack realized he'd stopped thinking about that night at Russo's as the most important moment of his life. It had been important, certainly, catalytic and transformative, and the beginning of everything that came after. But it wasn't the peak of his story. It was the foundation, The peak was this: ordinary days with his family, Mia's laughter, Claire's hand in his, Justice barking at squirrels, breakfast conversations about school projects and work challenges and weekend plans. The peak was building a life that honored Sarah's memory while embracing new love, that taught Mia about courage through daily choices rather than singular dramatic gestures, that proved justice was possible when people refused to look away from injustice. On the actual one-year anniversary of that October night at Russo's, Jack took his family, including Justice, who'd become an unofficial therapy dog at Mia's school, back to the restaurant. Vincent had invited them personally, wanting to mark the occasion and demonstrate how far the transformation had extended. The restaurant was full, vibrant with conversation and laughter, its accessibility features now so integrated into the design that they were invisible unless you were specifically looking for them. Wide aisles that accommodated wheelchairs and walkers felt spacious rather than medically necessary. Menus in multiple formats seemed inclusive rather than specialized. The entire atmosphere suggested that accessibility wasn't an accommodation but simply good design. Vincent greeted them at the entrance, his smile genuine rather than performative. "Thank you for coming, for trusting me enough to return, for giving me the chance to show what your courage created." They ate dinner together, Jack, Claire, Mia, Marcus, Patricia, and Vincent, a table that would have been impossible a year ago now, feeling almost natural. The conversation ranged from light to serious, from Mia's plans for her accessibility club to Marcus's latest support group success story to Claire's upcoming keynote at a National Disability Rights Conference. "I want to propose a toast," Vincent said as dessert arrived, "to the people who held me accountable when I could have gotten away with discrimination. To Jack, who taught me that courage looks like standing up even when it's scary. To Claire, who showed me that disability doesn't diminish humanity. To Marcus, who proved that silence today doesn't prevent truth tomorrow. And to Mia, who reminds us all that children understand justice more clearly than adults who've learned to rationalize cruelty." They clinked glasses, an unlikely assembly united by shared battle and the strange grace of transformation. "To courage," Jack said quietly, "to standing up when it matters, to building a world that works for everyone, not just the privileged few, to love that grows in unexpected places, and to the ripples we create when we refuse to look away from injustice." That night, after Mia was asleep and Justice was settled in his bed and the house was quiet, Jack stood on the back patio watching Portland's lights spread below him. Claire rolled out to join him, her wheelchair navigating the space with practiced ease, her presence beside him feeling as natural as breathing. "What are you thinking about?" she asked softly. "How strange life is. A year ago I was terrified about Vincent's lawsuit, worried I'd destroyed our lives by standing up in that restaurant. And now? Vincent just toasted us at dinner in the restaurant where he discriminated against you. We're married. Mia's thriving. Marcus has built something meaningful from his pain. Portland's accessibility enforcement has been completely reformed. Everything changed because I couldn't look away when someone was being treated badly. Not just you, all of us. Everyone who chose courage over comfort, who stood up instead of looking away, who believed justice was possible even when it seemed improbable." Claire took his hand. "You started it, Jack, but we finished it together. That's how change happens. One person's courage inspires others, who inspire others, creating momentum that transforms systems rather than just stopping individual incidents." Do you think we're done? With activism, with fighting for accessibility, with using our story to create change? I think we're just beginning. The Portland Initiative is expanding. Other cities are calling. There are conferences to speak at, policies to advocate for, businesses to hold accountable. But Jack, Claire paused, her expression serious. We don't have to keep doing this if you don't want to. Your courage that night at Russo's doesn't obligate you to become a professional activist. You can return to ordinary life, focus on your family and work. Let others carry the fight forward. Jack thought about that option. Returning to anonymity, focusing on the small personal sphere rather than public advocacy. It was tempting in its simplicity, its release from responsibility for issues larger than himself. But then he thought about Mia's accessibility club, about the messages he received from disabled individuals thanking him for speaking up, about the businesses voluntarily improving compliance because they'd seen what happened when discrimination was confronted. He thought about Sarah's deathbed wisdom, about living fully and using privilege, even the small privilege of visibility, to help others. "I don't want to stop," he said firmly. "Not when there's still so much work to do, so many people facing discrimination, so many ways our story can help create change. I'm not a professional activist. I'm still just a delivery driver who stood up once. But I can keep standing up. We can keep fighting together. That's what partnership means, right? Using our combined strengths to make the world better?" Claire's smile was radiant. "That's exactly what partnership means. And Jack, you're not just anything. You're a father teaching his daughter about courage, a husband building a life with me, an activist creating change, a decent man who refused to look away. All of that simultaneously, none of it diminishing the others." They stood together in the quiet evening, two people who'd met through crisis and discovered love, who'd fought battles together and were now learning to build peace together. Below them, Portland continued its existence, millions of people living their lives, facing their challenges, making their choices about when to stand up and when to look away. And somewhere in that sprawling city, in restaurants and stores and public spaces that were slowly becoming more accessible because of the fight Jack and Claire had started, disabled individuals were navigating their days with slightly less fear, slightly more confidence that if they were discriminated against, there would be consequences. Slightly stronger belief that the world could change, one confrontation at a time, one policy reform at a time, one business transformation at a time. That was the real victory, Jack realized. Not Vincent's transformation, though that mattered. Not the settlement or the media attention or even the policy changes, though those were significant. The real victory was creating a world where disabled people didn't have to be grateful for basic access, where discrimination had consequences rather than quiet acceptance, where courage could be ordinary rather than extraordinary. Mia had been right months ago when she'd asked if they'd won. They had won. Not completely, not permanently, not in ways that solved every problem or prevented every instance of discrimination, but they'd won enough to matter, enough to create momentum, enough to prove that standing up could create change rather than just personal destruction. Jack Reynolds would never forget that October night at Russo's. The fear and rage, the decision to speak up, the moment his life pivoted from ordinary to extraordinary. But increasingly, that night was becoming just the beginning of his story rather than its climax. The real story was what came after. The love he found, the family he built, the change he helped create, the way one moment of courage cascaded into a lifetime of meaning. And as he stood on his back patio with Claire's hand in his, and Portland's lights spreading before them, and his daughter sleeping safely inside their home, Jack understood that this ordinary, extraordinary life built on foundation of standing up for what was right, this was the happy ending Sarah had wanted for him. Not perfection, not wealth, not even justice in its complete form. Just the courage to keep showing up, to keep fighting for what matters, to keep loving despite fear, to keep teaching Mia that ordinary people create extraordinary change when they refuse to look away from injustice. That was enough. More than enough. It was everything.